feature presentation.
I didn't even check what draft it is. I'll cut this part out. What draft is it? It's 110, I think, right?
I think so. You should leave this in.
Podcast.
Show how the sausage is
Untitled
made.
Movie Podcast. It is 110. Okay, cool. 3 and a 2 and a... What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 110th episode of the Untitled Movie Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck. Alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Happy New Year, Matt.
It's past the 7th. You're not allowed to say that.
Oh, really? There's a rule? There's a law?
You haven't seen that Curb episode?
No.
Are you caught up on Curb?
No.
Okay. I'm watching Seinfeld, everyone. There's some news. Happy New Year.
Going back to the 90s.
5 seasons deep. Happy New Year to you, Eric. I know we talked a litit bit before, and we talk all the time anyway.
This is just for show.
Yeah, I know. Really, we're repeating things we just said. But how are you?
I'm good, Matt. I mean, 2022 kind of starting out a little bit depressing with all those deaths. Some of which, I mean...
Deaths, lockdowns.
Yeah, Ontario is in a lockdown, but it isn't because, like, there are certain things that are still open, like,
it's a lockdown for sure.
Yeah, but like churches are at like 50% capacity, which I don't understand.
Because if you believe in Jesus, you can't get COVID.
Apparently. Yeah, so we're at a place right now where it kind of feels like 2020 is repeating itself, and you even mentioned, in a tweet that it's like 2020 part 2.
2022.
Yeah. So it's been a little bit discouraging, and the motivational factor to do a new episode of the regular show has not really, sparred us to do any interest in recording that. But also on top of it, even just like covering regular stuff, because we're going to have to be more creative in the next month or so, depending on when theaters open again, because we will not have a review of Scream coming out this week. We probably will not have anything in terms of January releases other than stuff that's available to stream. So The Tragedy of Macbeth will be a review, but other than that, we're going to be a little bit more creative with, maybe reviewing Yellow Jackets season 1 after the season 1 finale is released. And so that it is what it is.
Bear with us. I know everyone's in the same boat. So we definitely want to do an episode per week of this show. We just kind of took last week off because, I think I guess this is our first episode of the new year, but after that most anticipated episode, which I thought was a great episode, you guys should go check out. It's the last episode. We did the 22 most anticipated films of 2022. And then our last review was Cobra Kai at the end of December, Cobra Kai 4, which I am rewatching all of Cobra Kai from the beginning as well. But yeah, I think you nailed it, Eric. Like, we won't have many new release reviews in January other than some of the streaming stuff that you mentioned, and we even have reviews banked or movies we saw a while ago that we're now holding until they kind of either have a VOD review or we're in a tricky thing because we're an internet podcast that's available worldwide. We get an email every week of where we're charting and things like that, and many times we're
so hot in Portugal right now.
Yeah, like all over the world, right? And so it's not necessarily like we should only be focusing on Ontario theaters, but sometimes we have to based on what access we get.
Based on our region, right?
Yeah. So even though we're available to everyone and we have a lot of US listeners and things like that too, like unfortunately we can't cover something like Scream because...
Or the 355.
Yeah. Yeah. The embargo's up on that, so we can talk about it, but we'll have
terrible.
That review. It's real bad. It's definitely January. And we will have a full review of that closer to when, theaters are back open here, and knock on wood, it's at the end of January, but probably not either. Like, I'm worried that we're going to miss out on Jackass and who knows what else. And like,
one of our most anticipated films of 2022.
I know. Spoilers. So yeah, like Eric mentioned, we watched, we are both caught up on Yellow Jackets. There's one more episode next week, the finale. So I think we'll just hold our thoughts on that until then, and we'll just do a full review of the first season. But yeah, I've been watching a lot of TV. Movie watching has kind of slowed down at like after the Christmas movie and the rush for voting for the Critics' Choice Awards, like the nominations. But I did watch Licorice Pizza again with Nevis, and I did watch the Harry Potter reunion, which you can log as a film on Letterboxd, but it's not really a movie. Those are like the only two movies I watched this year, 10 days into this here New Year. But yeah, we'll probably do more TV reviews, whatever.
Book of Boba Fett,
Whether
we'll do maybe the
yeah,
first 3 episodes of that.
I think the first half makes sense after watching the first two. Like, I can see why they didn't give it to critics. Not that it's bad. It's just, I think like there's not much to go off of yet, and we're 2 episodes into it. But and it's hard to even still know where the series is going or what it's doing. But yeah, I think after next week we'll do a first half of the season look, and then maybe we'll revisit that at the end of the season and things like that. But out of housekeeping, that's probably how the next little while is going to go. But I mean, speaking of this lockdown, like, yeah, it kind of feels like the beginning of 2020 all over again, right? Like that March to the summer territory where we were kind of in like a shit, it's bad, everything's getting shut down, things are getting delayed. um it seems like studio to studio, it's just everyone's taking a different approach, right? Like it looks like Paramount's just kind of marching through with both Scream and Jackass. And it seems like Disney's just gonna dump Death at the Nile in February, but then they punt Turning Red to Disney Plus, and that's in March, even after Death of the Nile in February.
which
So
is also
um,
disappointing. I understand it because the main demographic of you know of that fan base is kids, and a lot of kids that are like 2 to 5 or 6 might not be vaccinated yet, so releasing it on Disney Plus, but even just releasing it without like a premium, I feel really bad for Pixar. And to be honest, that Turning Red was one of our most anticipated films of the year, and it would have been nice to see Domi Shi's film on the big screen, especially because it takes place in Toronto. So
I'm still hoping that like a Lightbox premiere or something like that could possibly happen here, but
depending on where we are when we get to March, because again,
yeah.
it's so up in the air right now. And to your point, we're in that kind of like limbo stage where it's like you just have to kind of take it day by day. And like, we live in Ontario and movie theaters are closed, so there are no press screenings, and again, certain films we do not have access to at the moment, as much as we want to cover it. And I'm sure we will when it comes to, even like, if we miss Scream theatrically, we'll probably
We'll
review
have
it
a
for
review.
streaming, right?
Yeah, or in February
Yeah.
if theaters open back up or something like that. Ironically, what's weird about this whole thing is that we could drive an hour and 45 minutes to Buffalo, New York and go see Scream this weekend or go do whatever. And like that's just kind of bizarre to me. Like they did get rid of the same day you didn't have to test if you went over the border, you could come back. You do now have to test no matter what if you go over the border, PCR tests, so it makes it a little bit more complicated. And I'm not saying that you should do this anyway, or I was going to do it, but I did look into it because I was like, if I could, like, I wearing a N95 mask and things like that. And I know a lot of people are mad about theaters closing again in this lockdown because there's, and we've gone through the gambit of, when this first happened, we talked about the safety in theaters compared to, I don't know how you feel now, Eric, but I do think it's a good thing. But I'm also kind of torn on everything. I think we're just all just kind of exhausted at this point. Like, I think if they probably kept up with everyone wearing their mask and social distancing, you probably could have had theaters even at 50% or something like that. But who am I? I'm not a health professional, but sometimes I wonder if the people running this thing are either. So I don't know, man. It's difficult, and it's a bummer that theaters are closed again because we were finally, it felt sort of normal to go to the movies again. Um, But even Spider-Man, like I remember going to that VIP screening, and you went to one on Christmas Eve,
Yeah.
and you said Landmark, you talked about it on the last episode, that they were pretty good about, because that was when we knew everything was going to shut down in like a week or so, or there was rumors of it, right?
Yeah.
But at Spider-Man, it was like VIP theater, everyone's having dinner during the movie, taking their mask off, and like, again, I don't think that there's any concrete proof that there's been huge transmission through movie theaters or anything like that. But then I'm also just like, I don't think we have hard proof where people are catching it. Like, I don't think anyone knows. It's just like you saw everything open back up, and then cases started going back up with Omicron. Anyway, we don't have to dwell too much on that. When it comes to what you've been watching, Eric, we talked a little bit before, and we mentioned some TV. I'll have quick thoughts on Boba Fett before a full review. I'm a little mixed on it, and I tweeted this out, being like, I like a lot of the present day, I guess present day from his perspective, not necessarily, Star Wars is all over the place, but stuff in Boba Fett. I don't love any of the flashback stuff. And I know you've seen a bit of it in that first episode, Eric, but like they go way more into it in that second episode, and I get what they're trying to do. I just feel like the pacing is so off and strange when like of not intersplicing the flashbacks throughout the whole episode and just doing this like large chunk at the present at the beginning for like 10-15 minutes, and then 30 minutes or 20 more minutes flashbacks, and they're just like almost split into half, or like it's just these giant chunks, and I feel like it really breaks up the pacing of the show. And I just think like Boba Fett was never my favorite Star Wars character. Like, and
But
we
he's so
joked about that.
cool
He was
looking.
always, he looks super dope, or he did. Um, but he was always kind of a chump, right? Like he didn't really do anything in the original trilogy. And then he kind of goes out like,
He's
an
the butt of a
idiot.
joke,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Or the
And
burp of a joke in the
and I
case
know
of Falling
everyone
of the
liked him, but
Starlight.
I think some of that mystery was partly why people like enjoyed that character so much. So the more you've got of him, and I know we've got some young Boba Fett in both the prequels and the animated stuff, and um, you know, whatever you want to say about the prequels, but um, I just feel like him without his mask on and seeing Tamora Morrison, who I like, he's a good actor, but like um him doing this, the Boba Fett voice, and having these veneers in, and he's got these like big white chompers, and he looks like a baby in this onesie, like a giant man baby in this onesie in all these flashbacks. And I'm just like, this is, I don't know, there's something off about this that I just do not love. And like, I get the showing kind of a different side to the Tusken Raiders and trying to show different parts of the Star Wars universe and give them a bit more depth rather than being kind of these cliches and stuff. I kind of like that, but it's just the way that it's executed. I'm not in love with, but some of the present day storyline I think is cool, with him trying to take over Jabba's throne. Like that's a really, really cool idea. And him going through Tatooine and Mos Espa, and trying to, plant his foot down as the head of this, this crime syndicate is kind of interesting. But I just feel like, um, and some other people have said this too, like we learned everything we needed to know about Boba Fett returning in a couple episodes of Mandalorian through subtext or through his clothing or the weapon he was using and things like
Or
that.
his
Like
fighting style.
it's fighting style. And I think we got enough of that there, but it's the Star Wars problem of having to show you how everyone got everything or did anything, or how everything connects. They can't just let you kind of go, oh, I think that's probably how he did that. And then you can kind of fill in the gaps and you go, oh, why is he acting like a Tusken Raider? Oh, it's probably, because when he got out of the Sarlacc pit, he, whatever, you can fill that in, and you don't need to know every minute detail of how he got the staff and how he got his robes and how, like, it's a Star Wars thing. They did it in Solo. They've done it in the prequels. It's like every little Easter egg or thing you've been asking about, we're going to answer it. And sometimes the answer is worse than what is in your head. And sometimes you don't even need the answer because you can kind of fill in the gaps yourself. So they're just telling you a lot of stuff you either already know or you can kind of assume. So when you see it, it's just not that interesting. So I'm struggling. Like it is Mandalorian adjacent, and I do like that present day stuff. And there's some cool stuff in episode 2 with some new characters, or they bring in characters from other parts of the Star Wars universe that I kind of like. But um, I'm not like excited for the next episode, and that's a bummer. And like Star Wars is in a weird spot. So
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement to the point where I haven't even watched episode 2 yet. And I actually liked Boba Fett quite a bit as a kid, and always just like the design and look. But I felt like, to your point, when you explain away the mythology and the world building that is set up in exposition or sort of anecdotally, it just feels like it takes away any mystique that these kind of
exactly.
smaller supporting characters have. And with George Lucas's re-edits and revisions, that kind of took away from it. The prequels, with him as the young Boba Fett, like even in that first episode when you see the shot from Attack of the Clones again of him taking the Jango Fett helmet and putting it next to his head, I always laugh at that because like I think like, oh, Jango Fett's head is gonna fall out of the helmet because Mace Windu cut it off like right during the
Someone
fight.
pointed out that in that sequence, even in the prequels, maybe Lucas added this later, but you see the shadow of the head falling out of the helmet like after it's cut off.
Oh.
So his head's not actually in there.
So now it's been retcons. Okay.
Yeah, I guess. Like,
because to me it always looked like he cut it off like clean
and
off
the head
the
was
neck
still in there.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And it would have been funny when he's holding that and it just comes out. It's like, Dad.
Yeah. But there's some cool stuff there of like exploring like your dad who looked exactly like you because you're a clone of him, and like there's some interesting stuff there that I just feel like they might get into because they showed that flashback, but I don't know.
But another thing that you brought up, just in terms of the story being off, I even think the aesthetic is off quite a bit. Like you have the Gamorrean guards, you have a Max Rebo like character, because remember Max Rebo does die on the skiff when it explodes at the end.
So that's what people were questioning, being like, did he survive, or is that just a different person of the same race, or not person, different creature of the same race?
I think it'd be a different creature, but you look at the designs of all of these creatures, they almost look like the knockoff versions that are really good knockoff versions, but still there's something a little bit off with the look. And again, you're not going to dig up a costume that was made in 1983 and try to make it work again, but it does almost feel like everything is just off so much that it's not even necessarily Star Wars. It's like the dollar store version of Star Wars, and that
and I can't even put my finger on it, because partly I like that they're using silly costumes that look like they're ripped from the 70s or something like that. But then that aesthetic doesn't necessarily work with the stagecraft thing that they're doing, where, did you watch any of the behind the scenes of The Mandalorian season 1 or 2? Like when they showed you the new thing that Lucasfilm built that uses like Unreal Engine, the video game engine. So I think that is really cool, but I've noticed it even more in Mandalorian that I think it looks ugly as shit. And like there's something like, and don't get me wrong, Marvel guilty of bad green screen or blue screen. Like tons of movies are guilty of this, where the lighting never matches the background, or you can see that they're like Thor Ragnarok, one of my favorite MCU movies, I think looks like absolute dog shit a lot of the times, because you have just these CG backgrounds and you can clearly tell that they're all standing in front of a green screen. Like there are some shots of Cate Blanchett in that just look like just awful. And in this, I like the idea of this stagecraft thing where you're mixing practical sets with a pre-rendered background that's shot in 360 degrees where the camera moves with it, so the perspective stays the same. But then what you're talking about, Eric, with the costumes or the puppets and things like that mixed with Boba Fett, and there's this weird, like, I don't think they've completely nailed that perspective thing that I'm talking about, where you can kind of clearly see which elements are the set and which ones almost look like, when they used to use painted backgrounds and stuff. Like it almost looks like a painted background because it's like pre-rendered, and that can be cool, but I don't think it looks very cool in this. Like there is a way to do it properly, and I actually think Mandalorian did it pretty well, but those cities and places he went to did feel a little empty still. Um, but there's something off here with the perspective of seeing Boba Fett, seeing these practical sets, and then you can almost see the flat screen behind them, or like the LED screen. And it's almost like if you know it's there, you can kind of see where it breaks and shows you that stagecraft kind of thing. So I don't think they've completely nailed it yet, which is why I think people like Marvel haven't started using it yet, or other things, and I'm sure they will eventually once they kind of get that technology down. And I do think it is still the future. It's very, very cool. But yeah, I agree with you that there's just something, and I can't even, I guess I just put it into words, but like, there is just something off. And like, I think the pacing is off, and Tamora Morrison, and I like, again, his perfect white veneers. Like I hate pointing out like a look, but I'm like, why does Boba Fett have these teeth?
Well,
Like I
especially when
don't
he's covered in
like, yeah,
sand and bruises and scars, and
mm,
like, yeah, it's like that Hollywood thing of like when you're watching a period piece,
sure.
whether it be set like in medieval times, or like anything that's like before the 20th century.
Gotta have nice teeth.
Exactly, and it doesn't work because it's not accurate to the historical depiction of what dentistry was like, which there was none at those times. And it almost is like that, where you're watching him and you're thinking like, how are his teeth so beautifully white, against like a backdrop that is so harsh, but also he hasn't had any access to toiletries or utilities that can provide that. Like
And
they'd be
those are
yellow
silly
or
things, but yeah,
broken or
but
something.
because they're brand new veneers, and I can always tell, it's like, people can tell when someone's wearing a wig. And I mean, these are hard to miss. I think veneers are hard to miss in general. Like I remember Roman Reigns in the WWE got them pretty recently, and there could be
I just think
health
of Matt
reasons.
Dillon and
Um,
There's Something About Mary.
Sure, yes. And like, and sometimes it can be used for comical effect, and sometimes it's a health reason. So I never want to like poke fun at it or anything, because there are a multitude of reasons people get veneers. And maybe it's just a self-conscious thing. You don't like your teeth, you want to get veneers, power to you. But it's always sometimes so noticeable because it just does look like someone's wearing teeth over their teeth. And then especially when it's Boba Fett and he's unmasked for 60% of the show, and he's wearing this dirty onesie like the Penguin in Batman Returns. And I'm
He
just
looks like a
like,
giant baby at
he
times.
does. And I kept tweeting that. And I'm like, this needs to get more traction than it's getting, because he looks like a giant baby. And like, it's something about, and I like them humanizing him a bit more, or, him finding, Eric, you haven't watched the second episode, but essentially what they're doing is like trying to show now when he wants to rule with respect instead of just brute force or whatever, like Jabba did, or fear. He learned to kind of, live with the Tusken Raiders and accept them, and a little bit of humanity to Boba Fett. And I'm like, I get it. It's the classic thing of like the anti-hero or the villain solo movie. Haha. But you have to kind of humanize them or make them, make you want to cheer for them. But I don't know. I wanted like a dark, gritty, like slimy, gangster, seedy underbelly of the Star Wars universe thing. And like part of the show is that. And I just feel like the other half, I'm like, I get it. He got out of the Sarlacc pit. You showed me that. And even that was underwhelming.
Oh,
Where I'm
that was so
like,
disappointing. Like that was the thing I was most excited about watching.
I
And
liked aspects of it, but
it again, it all feels off. And going back to the innovation of Star Wars has always been guilty of this, where like, yeah, Lucasfilm has always been sort of a trailblazer when it comes to new technology and
yeah.
adapting early on. But also, when you're the first to do it, it doesn't necessarily mean you're the best, because technology is still evolving, and it might not work as well as if you've had time to really adapt with it and sort of augment it into, the series. And you look at like the even though Phantom Menace is not a great movie, but you look at how much of a decline there is visually speaking from that movie to Attack of the Clones, with both the CGI and a lot of green and blue screen backdrops in Attack of the Clones, and like shooting it digitally. Lucas became so lazy and dependent on the technical aspects to get a lot of the film finished in post-production of both Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, that you can clearly see that there is a drop off from Phantom Menace, and it is really an eyesore now when you're rewatching them in 4K or
because those were
streaming on
pretty
Disney
much all
Plus.
blue screen.
Yeah,
Like you see the behind the scenes, and it's literally floor is blue screen, all around them is blue screen.
and how the
thing,
CGI characters as
yeah,
well like when like that Dax character hugs Obi-Wan,
yeah, and he's just holding his arms out.
yeah, it doesn't look real. And not that like these characters look real, but at least with some practical effects and Jim Henson-esque makeup and costumes, at least there was a tactile quality to it, where it's so interesting thinking, like, again, it, always worth to embrace innovation, and thinking about like someone like Robert Rodriguez, who's a guy that cuts corners wherever he can.
That's why they hired him.
But it's also strange because Battle Angel, and I guess maybe it's because James Cameron had such a hand on that one, or a hold on it.
I still think James Cameron ghost directed that movie.
That movie specifically looks like what I want Boba Fett to be. Like, it has
Yeah.
that gritty scumminess, and it still has a lot of CGI, and it doesn't look real. But there was something about that movie that, like, when you read Tales from Jabba's Palace, the extended universe book, and you have this vision of like what that could be, like that's what you're thinking, oh, the Book of Boba Fett is going to take from. And then you're watching it, and again, it just, the whole time you're just thinking to yourself, this isn't working. Like, this doesn't even feel really like a Star Wars movie. This feels like,
I know,
like another studio
that's...
saw Star Wars and is competing with them with their knockoff version of it.
And that's harsh, and I pretty much agree with you. Like, it to me, it's like still Star Wars, so I guess like I am gonna wake up on Wednesday and watch the new episode, but like it's a bummer for me to kind of say that I'm sort of I am in that same boat where it just uh I think they're just in a weird transitional phase where they're still trying to figure this shit out. And like, this does very much feel like Pedro Pascal signed on to The Last of Us and whatever, and we can't have him for another year because he's doing that. We gotta fill the gap with something. Well, what's like Mandalorian adjacent? A guy wearing Mandalorian armor. People like that, so let's bring back this character and then give him his own series, where it's just like, all right, we're a third of the way through right now. I'm like, it's still too early, I guess, to really go, what is this show? You kind of get a better glimpse at that in the second episode, but even the action feels weirdly off, and like, yeah, it just doesn't have that like specialness that Star Wars should have. And I don't know, I'm excited to see what the Obi-Wan series are. We brought up Acolyte last week and different things like that, because I think we had a similar Star Wars talk. We might have even talked about the first episode of Boba Fett. Maybe we just talk about this on these shows, and then when the whole series is done, maybe we do a review, but we'll see. Yeah, I don't know. The movie side is even more complicated, so who knows when we're getting a new Star Wars movie, but that's maybe a good thing. Give us a break from stuff
the heart grows fonder, when
Yeah.
when being absent from something you love, and I think taking
Yeah.
that time to kind of maybe reassess where to go with the series is probably for the best. But to your point, like, even thinking of like the Mandalorian in those 2 seasons, it's almost it's almost like the Book of Boba Fett is the Fantastic Beasts of the Star Wars universe, where it's just a
killing
placeholder.
time until they can do Cursed Child.
Yeah, until they
Where
can
now
get back
they're
to the Mandalorian.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. And I hope it changes my mind by the end of it. Like, we're only 2 episodes in. There are some cool things. I'm just like, how much of this flashback stuff are we gonna get? Because it's not. I know some people who really loved it, and I'm like, all right, power to you. And I think that's, everything's subjective. So it's like everyone wants something different from Star Wars. And I'm glad some people are getting something out of it. I'm just like, whew, these flashbacks are just not working for me. On the other side, Eric, you want to talk some Seinfeld, or do you have something you want to talk about?
No, I mean, you mentioned it off the top. We've been both watching Yellow Jackets, and so we'll have a review of season 1 when it's finished. So we'll kind of save our thoughts on that. But it has been fun, and kind of, it's going to be interesting having that conversation, because I guess I can say this. I feel that the show would have been better suited as a mini series than a series, because I can now see where they're going to kind of leave it and kind of continuing into season 2.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, we'll talk about it more then, but yeah, you have finally dived deep into Seinfeld, which is now available on Netflix in Canada. I'm not sure if it's available elsewhere around the world, but
I think it's on Netflix worldwide.
okay,
I
that's,
think
yeah.
that was like one of their big, huge pickups after they lost The Office and different things like that. Because I think a huge part of Netflix's thing is that people just like comfort shows that they watch that are older shows. And I know that there's a huge focus on their original content, but a lot of people use Netflix to just watch old shit. And I know it was on Crave for a while, but I never dove in there. But now that it's on Netflix, it's one of Nevis's favorite shows of all time. I know it's one of your favorite sitcoms and shows of all time. I never got it like when I was younger. Like it was nothing, not something my parents watched. I had a couple friends, Mike Halkew and Mike Muntz, that loved Jerry Seinfeld and loved Seinfeld. So I remember seeing a lot of it when I was younger. But I watched a lot of stuff like out of context. So like I knew like the big beats in the show. I know how it ends. I know all that kind of stuff.
The pop culture aspect of
Yeah,
it
and
permeating
it's
into
hard to
everyday
miss
life.
that
Yeah.
stuff, right? Like, and then you go back and you do a little research or you watch that one episode. But what I'm finding is that one, it took me a long time for it to finally click with me. And Nevis told me that, and other people have told me that. And it's the classic thing when people are telling you to watch their favorite shows, but they're just like, okay, get through whatever. And for Seinfeld, Nevis is like, I like a lot in season 2 and 3, but get to season 4. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, I gotta watch 3 seasons before this gets good. And I kind of agree with that, where I watched season 1 and I'm like, ooh, this is just this is exactly what I thought this was going to be, and I do not really like it. Most of season 2, I was sort of in that same boat where I'm like, I'm sort of enjoying this, but like I don't know if I like it. I'm just like, I'm kind of just watching it without having any real opinion of it at all. Um, and then in season 3, I started to see like there's episodes here and there where I'm like, okay, I'm starting to get it. I really liked that episode. Or like I'm starting to see them kind of find their groove of knowing who these characters are and how to portray them. And then same with the writing of finding what the show is, which, the joke is about nothing. And I like that whole plot line in season 4 about them pitching the meta show within a show. And I'll get to that. But I liked that originally. I'm like, oh, okay, it's about Jerry Seinfeld finding material for his act through his friends and stuff like that, which is exactly what the show is. And I read that's how they pitched the show. But I'm like, I don't know. I just like everyone's fine. But I'm not super into this. And then I got to season 4, and exactly like Nevis said, within the first couple episodes, I think, of season 4, which is the first season where the show is very episodic, but they started to bring back characters. They started to kind of have a through line of like referencing things, which is why I'm glad I watched the first couple seasons, because even Kramer referencing the jacket he got from his mom's ex-boyfriend that he stole from him or whatever, which was in season 2, and he's referencing it in season 4, and or Art Vandelay like first comes up, like George's alias comes up in season 1 or 2, right, of him just lying out of his teeth. And like, so I'm glad I watched those first 2 seasons, but now that I powered through season 4 is when I really started to get hooked, where I'm like, ooh, I want to watch like 5 episodes of Seinfeld right now. And I powered through season 4, and I just thought like it was so great to kind of have that through line, but still be very episodic. And you can even tell that they were getting more confident in it. The audience started to really come aboard then. And like, the annoying sitcom-y things of everyone cheering when Kramer came in. And I'm like, everyone needs to calm down. I love Kramer too. He's the second best character on the show after George, but like, I, I hate like laugh tracks I can deal with, but like the cheering every time he came on screen, I'm like, all right, we get it, guys. He's gonna burst through the door and steal a bunch of paper towels and an orange, and then leave. Like it's great.
Giddy up.
It's yeah, it's great. And the mix of humor of like, everyday situational humor mixed with that kind of slapsticky stuff that Kramer brings, which is very, is it like vaudeville kind of like, old school kind of Three Stooges style kind of fumble around the place, or anytime Kramer slips and falls or bumps into something's really funny. And then it gets dark in places, which I wasn't expecting. And some of the humor is really dark. Some of it is dated, but also progressive for the time. Like it's almost like Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld knew like, hey, yeah, we can joke about anything really, but we will kind of acknowledge what we're doing at certain times. Like even the gay panic episode with like Jerry and George not wanting people to think that they're a couple, and like the continuous of, not that there's anything wrong with that throughout the whole episode, like I thought was a good way to kind of not be incredibly dated with stuff like that, and kind of make it work within the context of those characters, just not wanting people to think that they're gay, but while still being funny, but then also not being totally offensive or off-putting. And then there are certain things that don't hold up, whether it's like, uh, Jerry and George looking at Bob Balaban's daughter's cleavage and she's 15 or
Played
whatever,
by
right?
Denise
Which is like,
Richards.
oh, was it?
Mhm.
Okay. Because she's only in that like one scene. Um, and that was a little like certain things like that. Like I get you're still kind of poking fun at it. And I think Seinfeld will go to places that some other shows wouldn't, but that's obviously a sign of the times and different things like that. So you see certain things like that, and it's interesting watching it, with a 2021 lens, but I think a lot of it holds up. A lot of it is hilarious. Seeing those episodes that I mentioned, like in context, like the puffy shirt, the contest, the junior mint, like certain things that I knew of and knew of those references, but like hadn't watched those episodes all the way through, or now watching them in context of knowing these characters and liking these characters has been like a lot of fun. So I just watched a whole bunch of season 5 last night. I watched The Briss. I watched, what else
Oh,
did
with
I
the
watch
Moyle?
last night? The Moyle, yeah. I'll go to Netflix and try to find out. But
It's also just
um,
interesting to think like how much reverent and memorable material is in each episode. Like it's sometimes funny to think like, oh, like this one episode has 2 or 3, subplots that are just as enjoyable to follow
yeah,
along with than like the main sort of arc of that one episode. And um yeah, it's one of those shows that is like, it truly is a comfort show. And like when you go back and watch it, yeah, to your point, there are things that don't hold up, but I think in some ways it also works still because they are portrayed as unlikable people.
yeah,
And like Jerry's neuroticism when it comes to like him continually dating a woman every
yeah,
week, like that becomes a joke as well. And like he has no emotions or affection to anybody, or George being his own worst enemy most of the time. Elaine also kind of being a bit of an ass. Like they're likable characters in the sense that you enjoy watching them and hanging out with them, and they're relatable because they're flawed, but they're also people, but because they're flawed, I think you can understand, like with the gay panic episode, like why they are the way they are, even though
yeah,
they're not maybe maybe it's not as regressive as some other shows or
yeah,
movies of the time tackling it does it in a way that is you know Jerry Seinfeld's always been very careful when it comes to how he kind of tackles maybe at the time taboo subjects or controversy, and like it's just interesting to like go back and like watch some of those episodes, like even the AIDS walk episode when Kramer doesn't want to wear the ribbon, and
Yeah.
things like that. Like it's and
Is that
then
the one with the Nazis too? And I'm like,
yeah, like where
yeah,
George is
like
mistaken
there's,
as like
yeah,
the
the
leader.
Aryan cult leader. Like, it's just like, it's like, oh my God, I did not expect this to go there, but it is very funny. And I think you were asking me, that episode I loved because I think that was one of the episodes where it finally kind of clicked with me, where I'm like, oh, this is absurd. They're all terrible. But it's like Red Rocket, like watching someone who's just like always they don't always make the wrong choice. Like, they're not horrible people.
No,
Like
they're
you said,
just
they're
people. They're
flawed and they're
just
just people,
yeah.
and they're not great people, but like they're just being themselves. And like, it just makes for such enjoyable television, and it gets more and more absurd without feeling like it's absurd. And it's that, classic Larry David, now that I've watched a lot of Curb, like ironic kind of things happening to people, or like
Well, him
uh
being based on George, right? And Larry
yeah,
David actually
exactly, yeah.
being in a couple episodes here and there, or
God, he's
being
so funny.
the
You always
voice
hear his
of
voice.
yeah.
Yeah. You always hear the voice. I love the movie episode. I was telling you, like, I was like, oh, Elaine maybe has some. I love Elaine too. She's great, and there's not enough of her in the show. But maybe she gets more later. But there is a good amount, and she's always great when she has something to do. But I loved how much she takes the movie seriously and cares about the experience and stuff like that. That episode was great. Um, what did I watch yesterday? The masseuse, the barber, the non-fat yogurt, the lip reader with Marley Matlin,
Have you watched the
Licorice.
one what was it? I was going to ask you about. Have you watched the one where George has the parking spot in at the
Yeah,
hospital?
yeah,
That is
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Like that to
It's
me
really
is
good.
it sums up George so well. It's like let
Yeah,
the baby see this, like the first great
yeah.
thing in the world is this beautiful parking spot, and then like that person jumping and destroying his car with a
Yeah.
suicide, and then him trying to like get the hospital to pay for the car.
And that's what I mean with certain subjects that they weren't afraid to kind of poke fun at, but
Yeah,
never felt like, there are some jokes here and there. Like, a weird thing with Larry David, like a lot of fat shaming stuff in the show. Like, they really don't like fat people, or being fat is the worst thing in the world,
that comes
or
up
being,
in the last
and
episode.
does it, and
Yeah,
it even recently in Curb Your Enthusiasm, like, which is a show that literally premiered in 2021, this newest season. There was an episode there with a heavy set um man who was working on Larry's roof, and Larry's like, I don't want him to work on my roof because he thinks he's gonna fall through or whatever because he's bigger. And like, the end of the episode, the guy falls through the roof onto Larry's bed as he's like sleeping, or something like that, or as he's just lying there. And it's just like, you get that throughout the show, which has been the one through line that I'm just like, they do not like, they think being fat is the worst thing in the world, and they just like, that continuously comes up. And that's the one thing I don't think has aged super well, is a lot of the fat shaming stuff that like even recently with the non-fat yogurt was all about that, right?
yeah.
Because they wanted to test that it had fat in it, because Kramer, not having a filter, just tells Jerry and Elaine that they've been gaining weight, right? And like, that's not the worst. I don't think, like, I think today we've gotten better with things like that, and being body positive, and not saying that you can't have, you know not everything has to be PC. And I feel like a lot of this show isn't politically correct, but it does it in a way that is funny and doesn't feel like it's just being mean.
You're laughing at the four
Yeah.
main leads and not the people that
Yes.
they're interacting with. Again, like it goes back to like with Jerry dating people, like he always finds this hang up on each
Yeah.
person he's dating, whether it be, the man hands episode or
Haven't got there.
the
Or I
the
have.
Two-Face
Have I?
episode. There's it ultimately goes back on him. Like he's the guy that can't like
Yeah.
you know, he can't just put his own weird hangups aside and just go on with his life. And that's kind of the joke with him, is that you know, like, he's a guy that is always so judgmental, and yet, you know, doesn't look at himself. But I also love a lot of the supporting characters that, you know,
Oh my
frequent
god,
the
Newman is amazing, dude.
Newman.
Wayne Knight is the best.
Wayne Knight is incredible. You know, when the male centric episodes of him and Kramer going off and doing their things, or like there's an episode where Wilford Brimley pops up in the last episode, or one of the last episodes, and then you have people like Putty, who I think is amazing.
I haven't got to Putty yet.
Patrick
I'm
Warburton is
excited. Yeah.
incredible on the
Yeah.
show. Jerry Stiller,
Jerry Stiller I've seen a lot of, and he's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. George is living with his parents right now, which George is just the best. Like, he's also the worst but the best. Like, it's so funny. And I was like, how old are they all supposed to be when this show is starting? And I'm like, oh man, George is supposed to be 32 and like in the second season or whatever when I'm watching, and he was like, but I think it's so funny seeing him at his point of his life there. And like, and you said like all these people are flawed people, and I think what's great about Seinfeld is like no one's perfect, and we all have these different tendencies and things that we don't even like about ourselves that we do, or and I there is a lot of relatable stuff in all four of these characters that I think both is like, oh no, and like very makes it even funnier, right? Like I there is a lot of George that I see in myself, which isn't a great thing to say because he's such a neurotic, like kind of pathological liar, and just like it just the worst at times.
You always
But
talk about wanting to dress in velvet.
yeah. But it's just so funny, and like even some of the tendencies you don't like in yourself, of like being lazy sometimes, or I'm in a job search right now, and I love that he doesn't have a steady job throughout the first 4 seasons, and he has to go live with his parents and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really funny.
Because he's not,
And
he's not working with Steinbrenner yet, is he?
not yet.
Okay.
I know of Steinbrenner, and I know that he goes to work with the Yankees and stuff like that. But
Is he working with Daniel Van Broggen's character right now? You'd know him if you saw him. He's a character.
I'm at the
actor.
point he got a job at a company, worked there for a week, and then he goes to go work with a different guy. Elaine's at Pendant Publishing. He doesn't have a steady job yet,
Yeah.
so I don't think so. He's still living with his parents and interviewing, and but man, it is incredibly enjoyable, and I'm glad I have so much left, because like I'm on episode 10 of season 5, and I've heard 4, 5, and 6 are excellent TV.
I would
And
say
then
everything up to the last 4 or 5 episodes, or like even just like the last 2 episodes, are great. I think the last 2 episodes, they kind of shit the bed a little bit in terms
I
of
know.
how they...
I think I've even seen the last 2 episodes out of context, like with Mike and Mike. And I know what happens, and like I know people don't love that finale, but I'm curious, me not having all the baggage and stuff, because I know what happens. I'm curious to see when I get there how I feel about it. So,
But there is a funny joke that's not included on Seinfeld, but when Jerry Seinfeld, I think was on an episode of like SNL, and he did a parody of like what Jerry would be doing post Seinfeld, and it was an episode of Oz, the prison show, and it had like J.K. Simmons was on it, and it was like this kind of like movies TV segment within the episode of SNL, and it was pretty good.
That's good. I like and I've seen the whole Curb season when they do my first exposure to true Seinfeld was a whole season of Curb when he's trying to do the reunion. And I do like that season of Curb. So I'm going to go watch that season of Curb again after I finish Seinfeld. So yeah, man, I'm enjoying the shit out of it. And it's weird that it's taken me this long, because I've seen like there's like 11 seasons of Curb Your Enthusiasm now, and I've seen the majority of those, and I always liked it. And people are like, it makes no sense that you like Curb Your Enthusiasm but you don't like Seinfeld. And I'm like, I don't know, I just never really gave it a shot. So during this lockdown has kind of been one of 2 shows that Nevis and I go back and forth with right now, with that and rewatching Cobra Kai. So Cobra Kai has been like a comfort show to us. Season 4 is out now, everyone. You can check out our review over on Untitled Movie Reviews. Eric and I did a spoiler-free review of season 4 of Cobra Kai.
Scary Terry, he's back.
God is the best. And then yeah, it's Cobra Kai rules too, but Seinfeld has been so much fun.
Mandelbaum.
Anything you've been watching, dude? Like at the beginning of the year, you said you've been on TV stuff.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
Yellow Jackets, you mentioned.
I've reviewed some stuff for Roger. So like, I have my review for The Tender Bar, which is George Clooney's follow up to The Midnight Sky, and it's him playing it completely safe. It's basically Dad Rock the movie, especially when it comes to the soundtrack. It's fascinating to watch that movie because even though we don't like The Midnight Sky, we've talked about it on the show. We reviewed the film. I almost appreciated the ambition that Clooney was trying to get at with that film, where with The Tender Bar, it's a more easy watch. It's inoffensive, but it's almost like offensive because it's inoffensive, and it's so lazy and like it's cliched riddled. And I think that if Belfast wasn't released this year, it would be a big Oscar contender because it kind of fits within that kind of milieu of like a memoir, even though it's not based on George Clooney. It's based on this author, J.R. Moehringer, growing up in Long Island in, the 1970s and 1980s and coming of age. But it's just, again, like, it just takes the easiest route to get to where it's ultimately going, and you never really get a sense of who the character actually is other than the plot points. And it just plays it so safe, and you're just it's so toothless at times. And like Ben Affleck, who plays the uncle, is good, and it's nice to see that Christopher Lloyd, last year got some prominent roles in both Nobody and The Tender Bar, but it's just lacking any real personality. And again, like, you even think of like, Ben Affleck with Live by Night. That's a movie that doesn't really work, but at least The Town and Argo and Gone Baby Gone feel like they come from somebody, like from Boston, but also like they have a vision. Where Clooney's always been this guy where, like, the beginning of his career, he was trying to do a little bit of the Steven Soderbergh thing with Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Then he makes something that kind of fits into his wheelhouse with, Good Night and Good Luck, and, the politician stuff with The Ides of March, based on the play. And a lot of it is all surface level, but it kind of works just in its, like, it's well made, well acted, well and entertaining. But then he kind of like did like the Coen Brothers thing with Leatherheads, which doesn't work. And then after that, it's just like one generic movie after another, and you just get sick
it's a little
of it.
all over the place, really. And then he just starts doing kind of vanilla movie. He's doing like Ron Howard style, kind of just like, like kind of like vanilla pudding. Like it's fine. It's not incompetent, but it's just not great. And I haven't seen Tender Bar yet, so I can't speak on that, but I totally understand where you're coming from with Clooney, where I'm like, I'm never excited for a George Clooney movie. Like,
no, if
like,
George Clooney's starring,
I like him a lot.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. A George Clooney directed film, I'm not excited for, because I like Clooney as an actor and I like him as a person. Like, it's just whenever I see his name attached to a movie, I'm like, I don't really have super high hopes. Like, at best, I'm thinking it's like a 3 out of 5. Like, I never feel like it's going to be more than that. And that's unfortunate.
Or really. Less if it's The Midnight Sky, which again, not a very good movie, but I almost appreciated it a little bit more just in terms of at least it had some ambition, and it was a little bit sort of more of a message movie, a more earnest version of like Don't Look Up. But like watching The Tender Bar, it's just so forgettable. Like it's just one of those movies that, like, again, if Belfast wasn't released this year, it would probably be getting a bunch of nominations, and
really?
it would be that film that like is The Trial of the Chicago 7, or the inoffensive, well-made,
very
but just forgettable
okay movie.
That's kind of prompted by awards bait. But it is interesting that this is really getting no traction whatsoever, where, Belfast and even Hillbilly Elegy did get some stuff. Speaking of Ron Howard, like, it does fit within that category of films. And it's just like, even there's a voiceover narration throughout the entire movie done by Ron Livingston. And it is so hackney and cliched, and
Yeah.
it's like just hitting you over the head with what is going on in the scenes. And it's supposed to kind of like create this nostalgic kind of postcard-esque longing. And the one thing that they don't do, which I'm actually surprised it's the only thing that they showed any restraint for, was they didn't have a song by Billy Joel, who grew up in Long Island. And you think like every song that they have in the movie, is, again, dad rock, the film, and they don't have that. And it's just, it's very strange. And William Monahan wrote the script, or adapted the script for this, who wrote the Departed. So like, you think like, okay, like, you have a really good screenwriter here. You have a competent filmmaker, charming enough subject. Like, this should have just been, a delight. It's not. It's fine, but it's just like, it's, you won't, by the time next year comes around and we're recording again, I will have completely forgotten about this film.
Yeah, sorry, as a yawn.
No, that's how I felt watching the movie. I was just sitting there, where I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not offended by this movie. I don't think it like overstays its welcome. I just feel that it's kind of spineless.
Yeah. No, I think that there's a reason why I haven't watched it yet. Because I've had the screener for what feels like 4 months.
I have
but I'm
3
just
of them.
like,
They sent me multiple screeners of the Tender Bar.
yeah, same with me. I had to snap one in half and throw it out because I'm just like, I don't know why. I would have just preferred a digital screener too. But yeah, I've just had no. Is it out now
Yes.
on Amazon?
Yep.
It is. Okay. We might get to a review, but Eric pretty much just, we probably won't. Eric's review right there is what
And you
we'll
can
consider.
listen to my Rogers review as well.
Yeah,
It's fine. It's like, that's my, and that's summarizing George Clooney's career. I think that Clooney is a guy that is very likable when he's starring in something and working with a really good director. It's exciting. I know that, a favorite movie of yours is The Descendants, and I really love that movie and that performance as well. I think he's great in Michael Clayton. I think he's a good producer. I think he should
Up in the Air.
Yeah, he's amazing in that. I think that he should maybe just produce and sort of cultivate talent the way that Brad Pitt's company is doing, instead of trying to direct, because again, it just
I think that's the smartest way, man. Like, sometimes you just have to unfortunately bite the bullet and realize you might not be cut out for something.
right.
But like,
even though you're trying as hard as you can to do it.
And he'll always get work and he'll always find people to produce his stuff because he's George Clooney, and like, his name alone, even from a director's standpoint, will still probably be enough to catapult whatever he wants to do. But
then you get Suburbicon and you're just like, what are you doing?
Whew.
Yeah.
Whew.
And that's the thing that's so like unfortunate. And I don't, because like, I think George Clooney, from everything I've read about him in interviews, he seems like a decent enough guy.
Super nice guy. Loves Nespresso.
But there is that kind of like white male thing where like, he's continually made bad movies, but also continues to get opportunities. Sure. And because you said, he's a big name.
He's George Clooney.
He's George Clooney. But wouldn't it be great if he could help somebody that maybe isn't getting those opportunities and produce? Again, that's why I like Plan B. Brad
Use
Pitt's
your
company.
name for good. And Brad Pitt does a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
Where he finds unique talent. He finds people whose voices aren't being served enough, and actually propels that and uses his company for that. And I'm with you, where I feel like that would probably be a better use of Clooney's time. But I don't know. I might watch Tender Bar at some point.
It's perfectly fine. It's one of those.
Did it get any Critics' Choice nominations?
I think Ben Affleck got nominated for.
Okay, so I will watch it.
Yeah.
Because I want to be caught up with all the movies before voting deadline. So I will watch it. But
and again, it's hard not thinking about Good Will Hunting while watching it as well, because even though it takes place in Long Island and not Boston, but it almost feels like Matt Damon would have been better in that role if they wanted to kind of play up like a meta aspect of like, what if like Will from Good Will Hunting, didn't pursue academia and kind of just ended up kind of toiling away in
Sure.
hospitality jobs, but was still kind of self-taught and smart. And I think Affleck is good. Like, I think Affleck like does what is needed to be done with the role, and I also think Affleck's a much better filmmaker. Like, even though Live by Night's not great, at least those three other films I mentioned of
Are
his,
pretty good.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like you get more. It's funny. It's like, so it's the reverse of Clooney with him, where you get more excited when you hear Ben
When he's
Affleck's
directing
directing a movie than starring in a film, unless it's directed by David Fincher. So it's like,
Yeah.
these two Batmen are working together. And I mean, Clooney also produced Argo, and they won the Oscar for Best Picture for that. But it's just funny thinking like that. It's like this weird cosm in this
Yeah.
sort of collaboration.
That's funny. Before we get to the best films of 2021, which is what this episode is about, we wanted to do most anticipated films last year, and we want to do or the most anticipated films of 2022, which we did last week, and we're doing our best of 2021 this week. I want to talk a little bit about Dexter New Blood, Eric.
Yes.
Because
it sounds like a last name. Hello, Dexter New Blood. Please, my father was Mr. New Blood. I'm just Dexter.
That's kind of what the show is. I don't even know how to tackle this, but I was a huge Dexter fan, and
I wanted to ask you
kind
something specifically. Yeah. So when you first started watching it, you were cautiously optimistic, and you were like, okay, like they're kind of bringing it back to what the series was originally, and they're trying to kind of maybe retcon some of the stuff that didn't work in those final few seasons.
Yeah, they don't necessarily like retcon anything, but recontextualize certain things that you either didn't like in those last few seasons, in that final episode, in the latter half of Dexter, maybe even stuff that happens in those first few seasons, because Clyde Phillips did come back, who was the showrunner on Dexter for, I think, up until the Trinity Killer season, and then he left and the show kind of went off the rails. And I just like, the last few seasons of Dexter just were not very good. And I know some people like certain aspects of them, but like, I truly feel, you've seen the whole series, right?
I have,
Eric?
Like, and to be
are
honest,
you in the same boat? Or?
Yes. I don't even think necessarily like the Trinity Killer was John Lithgow, right?
Yeah.
So I like that season partly because of John Lithgow. But even before that, there were sort of moments in season, like after Dokes dies.
Yeah, which is like season 2.
I
which
think
they went way too early with that.
Yeah,
like
I think
the
show fails.
And the show like blew its load way too early. So I think the problem with Dexter, they do that Bay Harbor Butcher season in season 2, which should have been a season 6 storyline or something like that. You needed to keep Dokes around way longer.
He was one of the best characters on that show.
And he was, and they spoilers for the entirety of Dexter. I will not spoil Dexter New Blood for everyone. So if you haven't watched all of Dexter yet and you care, come back later. But yeah, we already kind of talked about the Dokes thing in season 2, but the whole Bay Harbor Butcher season being that early, it's just like they were almost like they had something with that first season and they're like, let's just do this right now. And I'm just like, maybe they didn't know how many seasons they would get, or whatever reason it was, or maybe it was just the best story they had at that time. But the Bay Harbor Butcher season should have been in the final act of Dexter. That should have been one of the things that should have been his downfall. Dokes' death should have been near the end of the series. Like all this kind of stuff should have been near the end of the show. And then I like the Trinity Killer season, but that should have probably come earlier or whatever. There should have been some reorganization. Anyways, Dexter New Blood. So everyone hated the finale of Dexter. Everyone
Lumberjack
really
Dexter
didn't like the last couple seasons of Dexter. So the end of Dexter, he drives into a hurricane. People think he died. His sister's dead. They had the police captain killed. What was her name again? LaGuardia. And my problem with Dexter in the last couple seasons is like, it was hard to cheer for him, right? Because like, I think obviously he was not doing great things, but the code and only killing bad people were one of the reasons why the show was compelling, and you could follow a show about a serial killer and feel like you could kind of cheer for this guy. Um, I think in the
Because he was
latter couple
killing worse
seasons,
people that were worse, right? And he was following
yeah, he
Harry's
would never
rules.
kill an innocent person, and he only killed. It was basically Batman, but with killing. Like it was just like, I'll only kill horrible people, and he had to have proof for it, right? Like he wouldn't just kill for killing's sake. And then in the last couple seasons, even Dokes in season 2, who he kind of gets killed, right? Like he started to become harder and harder to cheer for, because it wasn't necessarily the show kind of would get tied into corners or put into corners and not know how to get out of them. And then Dexter would have to kill innocent people or have them be killed by things he did, even if it wasn't by his knife, and things like that. And it became less and less, interesting and harder to cheer for this guy. So by the end of it, I just didn't care. And then, he had basically, I get it. He's a character much like, Spider-Man or something like that, where the people who know about him or the people that are in his life could be in danger because of the work he does, essentially. So I get that there's going to be some collateral damage there, but there was almost too much. Or he would go, I don't want to be found out, so you know what, you're going to have to die. Like, sorry. And that's just being like, well, now I can't really cheer for you because
Now
you're
he's
a
just a serial
hypocrite.
killer.
Yeah, now you're just a serial killer and a hypocrite, and I'm just like, it's not interesting. So that brings me to New Blood, which, like, I did feel like started pretty strong, where I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Like, it's weirdly shot in 239. It has a different vibe to it, but it also feels like, oh, we're going to get back to, what Dexter was about in those first couple seasons. And like, but then I think the show, and I haven't tweeted about this show at all, because I just watched it week to
It
week
just
and didn't
happened.
like it did. And like, I let 3 episodes bank up, and I wasn't keeping up with it week to week, but then the last couple episodes I did. And I feel like it has the best and worst elements of Dexter in it. So I feel like there is some interesting stuff. Like, it's no longer Harry, the vision that he sees. It's Jennifer Carpenter's character, his sister Deb, with the minus the creepy what are you doing, step bro?
Well, also
Stuff.
thinking like in real life, they also got married and
Yeah,
divorced,
sure.
and
Yeah. But she's in the show. She's kind of the Harry, vision that Dexter is seeing now. Um, but what I mean by the best and worst of Dexter, because I feel like it did get back to its roots and what you really enjoyed about Dexter. And it was interesting stylistically, where if there were flashbacks to Miami, it would be shot in 189, like the original show was. But then this show's in 239. And like, the first time he kills again is like a really kind of, he feels like he has to do it, but then like his dark passenger and his urges are back and stuff like that. But then the worst of Dexter is the like convenience of all the events that happen. And what's the word that I'm looking for? But like, it's just, in Dexter there were so many times where it was just felt so unbelievable of the connections between
contrived.
either characters or events, or everything is connected, or this like. And again, the whole villain of this season, the way that that's integrated of it, it's just like, well, it seems really silly that he's a bad guy, his son is a bad guy, and then Dexter's son is involved and he's having dark urges, and like, it's just all this ridiculous shit. And then that's kind of the stuff that bogged down Dexter by the end of it, is just like people being at certain locations but being too dumb to figure out what's going on, but then also being in a specific spot or a specific time, or showing up at a specific moment that was very convenient to the plot. And like, and you can just see the writing and like the connecting the dots on things of like, we need everything to connect to have Dexter involved in everything. And the people in his life be involved into everything. And then that's the kind of shit of the suspension of disbelief, where I get I'm watching a show about, this, a serial killer who only kills bad people or whatever. And that's who's been on the run for 10 years and people think he's dead. But like, it's those kind of things where I'm like, everything doesn't need to be connected, and it all just feels too convenient for all of this stuff, and like a little eye rolly when his son is also having dark urges and like all this kind of shit. So I found myself going back and forth of being like, I guess I'm sort of enjoying this, but like not really. And then on top of that, I feel like because they've been off the air for 10 years, they also felt a need to include social commentary on like everything that's happened since it's been off the air. So there's like opioid overdose commentary, there's missing indigenous women, there's school attacks, and this is all in a small town of 2,000 people that he's living in. And like there's just every there's a podcaster that comes to town that's doing a murder podcast to investigate
Is his name
things. It's like
Podcast?
no, it's not. Her podcast name is Mary Fucking Kill.
Of course.
And there's just like there's even more, but imagine any social commentary of something that we didn't really talk about much when Dexter was on the air, and they're like, we're just gonna fucking throw it all into this season, to the point
So
where
there's a lot
like,
of virtue signaling then.
yeah, and I'm just like, I don't know if you guys needed to include all of this, and maybe pick a focus and pick a lane. And I was always confused by how much time has passed or how much time hadn't passed, and like and how involved Dexter's, how Harrison comes back into the series, which isn't a spoiler, like that's a big part of it. And it all felt a little ridiculous, but then it kind of won me over by the end, where the finale, while I don't think it's perfect, I thought was as good as it could have been to redeem a lot of the things that I'm talking about and the original ending. Like, I do feel like they do a pretty good job of addressing some of the criticisms I had about those last couple seasons of Dexter, and even some of the things about the character, to the point where I actually think, and with all these plot lines that I'm bringing up, of feeling like so much was thrown into this season with his son, and why am I blanking on what's his name who plays the villain?
Clancy Brown?
Clancy Brown. And like that whole thing, and just how that's all tied up with like the storyline of the missing women. It's not just indigenous women, it's just missing women in this area. But Dexter's uh girlfriend is the chief of police and stuff like that. Like it's all just that silly, but then the way that that all comes together, and um but and she goes to like a police conference, and Angel Baptista's there, and it's just like that's the silly convenient stuff where I'm
Right.
like,
The contrived
I
nature
just
of
yeah,
the
like
plot being the main motivator compared
yeah.
to the characters themselves.
Yeah, and like that's the silly stuff that you like, okay, I get it, but like that just feels really convenient. But then that being said, I thought the finale was satisfying, and I thought it addressed some things in an interesting way. I don't think it's perfect, and I've seen people already get mad at the finale again. And I'm like, you're never going to be happy then if you hated the original ending and you don't like this one. I'm like, what do you want? What do you want? You just want like,
Yeah,
so
I think that's also the problem though with legacy sequels
yeah.
and series and continuations in general, because it's like, how much of it do you take from the original version, especially if there has been a hiatus or a gap between, the original series or film and versus the new one. And then when you're bringing in, we were talking about with Star Wars, with the Book of Boba Fett, when you bring in certain things and sort of break down the mythology and sort of the minutia of it all, and then you try to interweave it into something that's also supposed to be kind of fresh. It kind of feels like it has to adhere to the original material first and foremost, and sometimes there's a lot of fan service when it comes to that. And the show that you're basically summing up for me, the way that you're describing this, is what those last two seasons of the X-Files were. And the X-Files was never a consistently great show, but
The reboot ones that they
yes,
brought
yes. So
back?
those
Yeah.
last two seasons, like Chris Carter was never a great writer to begin with, but he was a good idea man, and had fun with genre episodes. But when it came to bringing that show back and kind of doing the similar thing of like, okay, how much are we going to kind of explore a reference from the original series, and then also how much of it is going to kind of be sort of modernized in a time where things have changed significantly with technology, with social commentary, with just the characters themselves and where they are and their personalities, but also because it is, a part of this other kind of bigger world, we still have to include all this other stuff, and it has to kind of fall into line with that. And whether we have to bring in characters that wouldn't make sense to bring back even though they were fan favorites in the original, or storylines that are familiar to kind of echo what happened in the past,
Yeah.
it does all feel a little bit contrived and fan service-esque. And that's the problem with legacy sequels and
Yeah.
series. And sometimes it works. I think, like, with obviously with Spider-Man No
Spider-Man?
Way Home,
Yeah.
or the Creed movies, I think that
In my
they work.
opinion, Ghostbusters, but
Right,
we
right.
disagree.
Talking about podcast. But that's the risk you gamble. I mean, even again, going with Star Wars, like, how
Yeah.
much of it are you going to repeat or feel like you have to tie into the Skywalker saga instead of just
Doing
exploring a
your own
whole
thing.
universe?
Yeah.
Now Dexter takes place on planet Earth, and in one sort of, like, from Miami
You're
to
not just gonna
Alaska,
go to
right?
some other serial killer. Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
when you said the Batista thing, like, that makes, like, perfect sense, where it's like, oh, come on,
It
really?
that was a moment where I'm like, okay, I don't know about this
Even though I like
anymore.
David
Like,
Zayas, it's
so do
just
I. It's just like he's underused in the series and he's just a plot device, really. But like, it's just one of those things where it's just like, oh my, it's the problem I had with the last couple seasons of Dexter and even some of the earlier stuff that you're talking about, where it's just like, either the people right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time, or just it would never happen. And it's strictly only because these characters are connected that his girlfriend and him are at the same conference, where you're like, it's so unbelievable that it's just, that's when you start to see, oh, this is a television show. And I get it. Like, but I was so mixed on the whole thing where I'm like, like the Breaking Bad movie as well, that
El
like
Camino.
El Camino, which I forget everything that's in it because I'm just like, it was completely unnecessary. And mind you, again, if you were a huge fan of Dexter, I don't know if we needed 8 or 10 episodes. I forget what this was, but um, there's enough in there to be like, oh, this feels familiar, yet they're trying to modernize it. They're trying to make some, like, again, whatever. Some of the stuff they have to say is interesting. Some of it's not. It's a little messy. It's a little like overstuffed. But the finale is like, I wouldn't say just jump into the finale either, right? You kind of have to sit through those episodes. And if you really hated the original ending, like, I do think this is a more satisfying, like, complete ending. Where that last one I feel like completely shit the bed. But um either or, I'm like, I don't know if I needed this. Like, I was fine. We've gone 10 years with without Dexter, and I'm like, I've made my peace with how he becomes a lumberjack and he goes to live in, whether it was Alaska or Canada there. Here it's in, is it upstate New York where he is? I forget. I think it's upstate New York because she goes into this city, like New York City, for that conference, I think.
So, like, the
Um,
Catskills or something like that.
something like that. I'll figure out what it is, but
But it is just funny thinking about that again as well, because
or Minnesota maybe. I don't know.
these characters and storylines that have been kind of missing in action. We're even, I mean, even though we haven't watched this show, but, like, look at the conversation with the Sex and the City series,
Oh, yeah,
and,
Nevis is watching that. Yeah,
like, again, sometimes it works and sometimes it's like, okay, well, this show hasn't been around for a
Iron Lake,
while.
New York. It is New York.
Okay, so yeah, and you think, like, some of these things work and some of them don't, and, like, maybe the best way to approach it is either kind of deconstruct it the way that Twin Peaks: The Return did, or completely reboot it and do something different. Even if it doesn't work, at least it's, at least you can say, like, oh, we didn't just retread the same thing or try to, course correct what we failed on the first series. And like even something like today, watching the trailer for Bel Air, the Fresh Prince of Bel Air
I haven't
dramatic
watched it yet.
series, it doesn't look like it looks like
Like
something
a
you would see
fake
on
thing.
Entourage, in
Yeah.
like we rebooted with the Fresh Prince of Bel Air as a dramatic
It
series.
feels like a joke, like an SNL
It
skit,
does.
right?
It
Yeah.
totally does. And it was weird watching that because it didn't look real. Where like at least with like the Saved by the Bell stuff, I haven't watched it. It kind of feels like it's in tone with what that series was, but also makes sense the way that they're bringing in younger characters to kind of be the focal point, so you can kind of bring in more of these, new elements. So it almost
And
feels
then
like they should
keep
have
the
made
original
Dexter's
cast
son the
as,
main character.
and he is kind of, but I would say they're co-leads in the whole series, right? Like it is, the New Blood is very much like the show bringing in Harrison, and um I just don't know how I mean, they did it in this, and I just don't know if it completely worked, because even some of the stuff that they do with him, which I've teased, is just kind of like, but then where they take it is kind of interesting, right? That does address some of the, problems I had with the Dexter characters. So I'm with you where I'm like, I'm not against legacy sequels or legacy shows, or I mean, Cobra Kai, look, it is the
Exactly.
perfect example of like Spider-Man and Cobra Kai are two great examples of kind of, of doing that right. And so it can be done. It's just a way of doing something fresh with it, but keeping those characters and feeling like they're true to those characters. And it just, I don't know. I'm very, very mixed on New Blood. So there was something else I meant to bring up during that conversation that I missed out of. Maybe it was the trailer stuff with Bel Air, but I forget.
But with Dexter New Blood,
Um,
the other thing is, you said that, so like Harrison's sort of reconnecting with Dexter was
yeah.
almost coincidental.
Um, no,
So
like
he was
it's,
tracking him down.
yes,
Okay, that
yes,
that
yeah.
narratively does make sense, because
Oh, it
at
does.
least you
Yeah.
have like a character who's kind of like actively
His father
pursuing
abandoned him,
him.
and he's trying to find, whose father actually was, right?
Right.
Because they write off Yvonne Strahovski, was that her name?
Yeah.
Yeah, her character, she's not in it at all. And then that's how they kind of have Harrison tracking down. It's like in the first episode or the second episode where Harrison, I think the first, um where, and then the whole show is about, Dexter trying to actually, be a father to this kid, and while hiding his identity, but also, lying about everything again, and while also killing for the first time in 10 years or whatever,
And getting
right?
a
Like
taste for it again. Does he still have
yeah,
the
the ritual.
or the like the microscope, the blood spot? Okay.
No, that's a thing that they touch on as well, right? Like he doesn't need to be keeping creepy trophies anymore and stuff like that. And they play into that with they always find someone who's, yeah, much worse than he is to make the villain. And just the stuff there, I'm just like, right, in this small town where Dexter happened to do this other thing that's connected to this guy, and that's how he finds out about him. I'm like, it's just all kind of
Convenient.
silly, yeah, inconvenient.
That's a shame.
Anything
Again,
else you want to?
I liked hearing you talk about it. And to go back, like the other thing I
It's
kind
not worth watching.
right,
It's just, it's
especially if
not
you had
great though.
watched the
Yeah,
original series.
yeah.
The one thing I also kind of liked about Dexter as well, it happened more in the later seasons, was they were bringing in more character actors to play either the villains or kind of integral supporting roles. Like you had, we mentioned John Lithgow, you had Jimmy Smits, you had Peter Weller, Shauna Tosi. Was there somebody else that was big? Those last couple of seasons just blur
Hmm.
together, but like
Hmm.
someone like Clancy Brown, I really like. I mean, it's almost like an obvious pick that like he would play the villain just because
Yeah,
he's always played the villain.
and
But
he's great.
yeah,
He's great, but he just falls into some of those kind of Dexter villain kind of tropes and things like that, and some of that overwriting and things that I'm bringing up. But I do like Julia Jones a lot, as Angela, who is his girlfriend and the police chief. She's great, and the kid who plays Harrison is Jack Alcott, who didn't we talk about him recently, or did he get cast in something? Forget what it was, or maybe I was just thinking about this show. Um, and then you have John Lithgow appear in this series too, but it just seems so. I remember when they announced that in the casting, and I'm like, it's just in like a flashback that we've kind of seen from that show. So it's weird that they got him back for that instead of just using archival footage and stuff. But um, yeah, it's fine, and I think the end. I'm glad the final episode kind of won me back a little bit because I was really not on board by then. Like I wasn't even really looking forward to the finale, but then the finale, I'm like, okay, you know what? This made this series worth it, and it's how many episodes? It's 10 episodes, which is a lot, which
How
I
long
feel
are
like
they?
is like an hour.
Okay.
And it's not worth watching if you were a big fan of the show. So
I'm
and I think
curious to watch it, but like everything you're telling me almost sums up how I felt by the end of that first series run, where I think like
yeah,
the first couple of seasons, and I think we'll talk about this as well with Yellow Jackets, where it's like it really captures, everybody's attention and people are addicted to it, and then it just runs out of steam by season 3, or it can't sustain itself, or it's following maybe too much of the novels and not branching off and doing its own thing. And then when it does branch off and does its own thing, it makes the wrong choices or the decisions that kind of, like the way that they handled again Dokes. Like I keep thinking like that would have been an amazing character to continue on. He was one of the best in
he
the
doesn't die in the
series.
books,
Yeah, and
or he
it's
might
such a
later,
shame,
but not that early. He gets maimed in like
Well, that's putting it
but
lightly.
yeah. Um, but I even read some of the books. Like I was huge. I would loved Dexter. I read some of the comic series that they did. Like I was all in on that show. I remember in the first couple seasons, and then like to the point where I went and read Jeff Lindsay's. Um, his name is Jim Lindsay in the show. His alias.
Of course.
Um, so,
I remember my
anyways,
dad loving it because
my mom did, and she was the one who got me into it.
well, it's funny because like my dad is a retired forensics officer,
Yeah.
and he hates all that stuff because
Like
like
police procedural shows and stuff.
CSI, all that,
Yeah,
like because
because it's all ridiculous.
it's all, it doesn't make, it's none of it is truthful even when you
Yeah,
have consultants on it. But that was the one show that he said got kind of right with the kind of
blood
macabre
splatter and
tone
okay,
of
yeah,
like how forensics analysts and investigators work with each
actually
other.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's cool. Anything else you want to talk about before we go into best movies of the year?
Well, we'll go into best movies of the year, and this actually connects to it because it's on your list. But I watched The Worst Person in the World,
Yeah,
which I think the thing I liked the most about it was the soundtrack. I think the performances are uniformly good. I think that the direction is innovative and playful in certain scenes, but I do have some problems with
the third
one of the
act.
characters and how this person is brought back into the storyline, and that was the one thing that kind of soured me a little bit on the film. But other than that, it's a well-made movie. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a much better film than Joaquin Trier's last movie, which was Thelma, which was his sort of telekinetic sort of horror movie, even though he was trying to kind of branch out of what he normally is known for. But again, there's a lot to like in The Worst Person in the World, especially like the idea of, we'll be talking about Bo Burnham's Inside, when you're turning 30 and you're still trying to figure your shit out and trying to kind of work through things. And I really like the character of Julie, where she's not the worst person in the world. She's far from it. She's just somebody that is just kind of, again,
But I even like that title of how you might think you are because of all the pressure you put on yourself, or
right, or
just like,
feeling guilty
yeah,
for wanting to go in a different direction than the course that you're set. Like I think the
exactly,
first
yeah,
scene of that movie, and it's very novelistic and broken down into chapters,
12 chapters.
12 chapters and a prologue and an epilogue.
I
But what I
love.
like about sort of the first 10-15 minutes of the movie, we see that character change her major multiple times when in school. And I think that that really encapsulates her personality perfectly. And I think that just captures how sometimes people are very impulsive, whether it comes to,
Don't know
their
what they want or where, like, what they want in life or anything. And that's what I
exactly
really loved about it. And
same.
I don't want to say, like, bringing back to the Seinfeld thing of that she's necessarily flawed, but I just liked,
She's a
just she
complex
was
character.
human. Yeah, she was human and complex. And that's what I really loved. I loved that performance. I loved how human it was and how relatable it felt, like, of just going through life and, being indecisive or not knowing what you want or making mistakes or and things like that. And it's been a while since Nevis and I watched it, but
It's been a
like you said,
while.
the soundtrack, the style, like I don't have really, I, it's hard because I don't want to spoil it for people either, but I understand what you're talking about with that character in the kind of last little bit of the movie. But that didn't bother me. And I felt like, as a learning moment for that character, like, I see what you're saying, Eric, when we talked off air for it, but I liked it for that character, even if it's at the expense of someone else. But um, yeah, I really, really love that movie. And yeah, it will pop up again. And I don't need to talk more when it does come up,
But
but
it's worth your
yeah,
time, and it's a
absolutely.
film
Yeah.
that is going to be released in the US through Neon the first week of February. I don't know what MK2 Films here in Canada is doing with it yet. I think it'll probably be sometime in mid-February if theaters are open in Ontario. But yeah, it's a very well-made film, and it's also very funny and poignant. And there was a moment in the movie that rang so unbelievably true. And I'll be fascinated to have a conversation with my brother Kyle on it, because there's a scene where um, Julie goes to visit her father, who, they don't really even have that much of a relationship to begin
Sure,
with,
I get what you're
and
talking about.
that
Yeah.
sums up
Yeah.
divorce so perfectly. Like, I was
Yeah.
like, oh my god, this
I
is
thought you were
hitting
gonna bring
home.
up the mushrooms, but
No, that scene's a lot of
yeah,
fun and playful, and there's a coffee break
yeah,
sequence that's great. Again, the
yeah.
soundtrack is amazing. I've been listening to Bad Feeling by Cobra Man quite a
Love
bit.
that.
I've
Yeah,
been listening to Todd Rundgren, Healing Part 1. Yeah, it's a really good movie. Like, the sum of its parts, there's so much to like about it. It's just that third act that kind of rubbed me wrong a little bit. But again,
I feel like it's how I feel about Licorice Pizza. You kind of feel about this
right.
movie, where I rewatched Licorice Pizza, um, and I'm sure another movie that will pop up on our or certain people's best of the year, and that's why I'm making this comparison. Where I feel like I feel the same way, where I'm like, there's so much I love in this movie, but there are a few things that I'm so hung up on that stops me from loving it. And I felt the same watching Licorice Pizza, and whether it's about certain characters or certain, plot elements or whatever, but from a technical aspect. And I think it's a weird thing where I think I liked the movie even more watching it this time, Licorice Pizza,
Yeah.
but then I also disliked the things I disliked even
Even more,
more
because they they
this
they
time.
stand out. Yeah, and that's how I felt watching The Worst Person in the World. And I haven't rewatched it, but I probably will,
Sure.
because again, there's a lot of stuff in it that is really wonderful. And the other movie I thought a lot about that I liked more
Also
than,
great soundtracks.
yes, yeah, oh, absolutely. The other movie that I thought about quite a bit while watching it as well, that I think is a little bit better, that's supposed to be getting a release in North America this year, that we both really liked, is Ninja Baby. And like, the
Yeah.
idea of another film that's like, Scandinavian culture being very progressive, but also like the animation, or the comic book artist sort of plot of
Yeah.
Ninja Baby kind of being not too dissimilar to the Anders Danielson Lai character, who's also really
Hmm.
wonderful in Bergman Island this year, and has been in many of Joachim Trier's earlier movies like Reprise and things like that. So again, a lot to like, and your comparison to Licorice Pizza is completely apt, where it's like the stuff you love you completely embrace, but the things that kind of turn you off or make you kind of critical, you're going to understandably be more critical of those things, because there's so much that you like, and those things that you don't stick out even more.
It's exactly watching it, Licorice Pizza this time, and I watched it with Nevis, because she hadn't seen it yet, and she was kind of in the same boat as well,
And Kyle
where
was too.
there's
Kyle saw it before everything closed down, and he's like, there were parts that I loved, but um, he had more problems with the structure of it all. Like he
okay.
didn't like the Shaggy Dog. I don't want to talk for him either, but like,
No, same with Nevis. Yeah,
yeah,
I don't want to talk for her either, but it's just I yeah, it was like scene by scene, I found myself going like, I absolutely love this. And then the next scene I'd go, I don't love this. And
which is
then
like an
like I'd go,
anthology movie,
yeah,
right?
it almost feels that way, even though it is, it's not, it's more of a hangout movie
They're
and things like
vignettes,
that.
right?
But they
Like,
are kind of vignettes, even if it's more structured in a narrative, linear way. That's what I was going
and
for. But
have the same characters constantly
throughout
throughout.
them,
Now you
yeah.
can say that Wes Anderson's The French Dispatch does have, the main group of reporters throughout, but they are the stories are tonally different and what have you. But I can understand that criticism as well to Licorice Pizza, another Anderson, with Paul Thomas, in that, like, maybe certain scenes, not only because they're problematic, but because maybe some scenes are stronger than others, even though the through line is consistent compared to an anthology movie.
Yeah. And yeah, I just found myself, we listened to the soundtrack over again. The cinematography stood out even more. Just that, even though we watched it on a digital screener, just like that texture that film brings to it, and the just the entire, from a technical standpoint, the movie's immaculate, and like certain sequences or characters or performances, I'm just like, fuck, this is so good.
That
But
talent
the
agent scene is
is
amazing.
incredible, dude. And one thing I noticed more this time, which made me like the movie more, because I was having this discussion also with other people who have seen it, and my problems with the age gap, which I've seen other people bring up. I still think, and I know you love the movie, but you're in agreement that the racist joke just stands out and is
Well, and the age
weird,
gap
and
thing too. I
like,
I I think for the
yeah,
most part, Paul Thomas Anderson keeps that relationship platonic, and is
yeah.
actually saying something interesting about Alana Haim's character and sort of where she is and why she
And
has to
that's
have
what I
that.
saw more out of this time. Sorry
Yeah.
to cut you off, but
No,
I
no.
I I totally saw it more from, she's not perfect, and and there was a great article. I wish I had the name that Neva shared it to me. I'll try to tweet it or retweet it and reference back to this podcast. But I noticed way more, like, I'm like, okay, I don't think the movie is necessarily saying what she's doing, like, is not saying it's okay or anything like that. It's just, and it's something we talked about in our original review. It's just presenting it to you, right? And you can take it for what you want. Like,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily saying it's a good thing. It's just, this is what it was, and this is what I'm presenting to you. And like, um, I saw that more, and there's even some, like, with the music, some unsettling moments, or it feels uncomfortable, and like I noticed these things more in my second watch, where I'm just like, it does feel intentionally off a bit at sometimes. Like, it's not all just happy go lucky. It's the 70s. Anevis, I think, just shared the tweet with me by Lauren Wilford, who wrote some thoughts on Licorice Pizza. It's loading. A great movie about a woman embarrassing herself, and she wrote it on Letterboxd. So go check out
Oh yeah, I saw
Lauren
that
Wilford.
last
Um,
week. Yeah, it was
yeah,
good.
and thank you, Nevis. Um, so, and I thought that was an interesting perspective, where it's just like, I think the movie isn't necessarily, and I have problems with the ending without spoiling it, but like, I don't know even now with the ending if it's really saying like, yay, like, kind of thing.
I think it's more
Where,
cynical than anything
yeah,
else. Where like
yeah,
like where she is, it's it's an interesting conversation to have. I think you
yeah.
can look at it in multiple ways. I think that the criticism with the age gap is very valid and understandable, and I know why. Like it's something that, like, you know if we're going to criticize Woody Allen movies for doing it, Paul Thomas Anderson should be fair game as well, or
Yeah.
anybody that does that. But it's also fascinating to think, like, it's the same thing with Red Rocket, but Red Rocket does take this weirdly more ethical stand with it and divides that line, I think, a little bit more clearly than
Yeah, I
Licorice
agree.
Pizza. But both of those movies are also very observational, and they're not
Yeah.
force feeding you either, which is interesting because, again, like in the
One
hands,
is more clear of like, this is bad what this person's
yeah,
doing.
yeah, because
And
in
the
the
other
hands of
movie
a
makes it, yeah.
yeah, in the hands of a filmmaker that is like, you know, more kind of spoon feeding you, like that, it would be kind of direct. Where, like, if you want to see a really great film about sort of a predator, an older guy sort of, you know, going after a teenage girl, there's a really great film called Smooth Talk with Laura Dern and Treat Williams from the late 1980s. And that film is really interesting because, again, it kind of takes the point of view of this young girl kind of being, you know, seduced by this older guy, but this guy is like
Bad.
awful,
Yeah.
repulsive, but in her, from her perspective, he's alluring,
Yes,
you know.
exactly. I
And
mean, it goes back to Lolita and things too,
yeah,
right? So like, I mean, it's not a new thing that Hollywood has tackled, and they continue to, for some reason, go back there. But you know, it can be interesting. It's just in this, you know, that was one of my problems where I'm like, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this. But in my second watch, I was like, I still didn't love it, that element of it, but I started to go, okay, maybe he's not necessarily like approving of the things that are happening, which he's just kind of being like, it was the 70s. This is the stories that this guy told me, and I'm presenting that to you,
yeah.
and you feel how you want about it.
Well, we even talked about, I mean, you know, you discovering Seinfeld. As much as I like Seinfeld and Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David, Jerry Seinfeld, after the show was finished, dated
Dated a
was
17-year-old. Well,
17-year-old.
she met him when she was 17, and I believe they didn't start dating until she was 18. But
Yeah,
that's, yeah, not great either.
yeah.
Which, yeah, so I mean, it is a weird thing with this obsession with Hollywood to kind of like, I don't know if that was like necessary for that movie. That's what I mean. Like, I don't know if they focus enough on the age gap other than it just being an age gap for them to have an age gap. And I know I said age gap a lot there, where I'm just like, I don't know if the movie's really taking a stance on
It's my
going,
favorite version of The Gap.
I need to say something about this, where you could have made them closer in age or something like that, where it wouldn't have been something that people needed to talk about. And then you could have just focused on that kind of free flowing kind of hangout vibe that the movie has. So if you weren't really going to take a stand on it, why have it? And maybe it is what I'm saying of like, I was told these stories back then. It was more accepted, you know, or something like that, of like, people didn't question it. It was just like, she has that one conversation with her friend of being like, is it weird that I'm hanging out with them? Or no, her sister,
Sister, yeah.
sorry. And she's like, no, not really. And like, and again, you're still a young person in your mid 20s, but like, that's not a great excuse for that either, right? Like, it's that anyone can make the excuse, well, you're still young when you're 25, or she might be 28. There's that kind of thing there. But I don't know, man. Like, I don't want to focus too much on it, but going back to the original point, to Worst Person in the World and this, like, I think there's a lot of similarities in our opinions on those two movies, where they're two movies that I think objectively are very, very well made. um it's just, we have some issues with some of the way characters are portrayed and things like that, or used
Yeah.
in certain ways, as a, whether it's a plot device or for another character or something like that. So both worth watching, absolutely. So if you haven't seen either movie, like, the one thing I found with Licorice Pizza is, like, even watching it the second time, and I don't love the movie, like, I gave it a 3.5 again, but it's still a good movie. Like, a 3.5 is still a good movie. I'm like, I think it's a movie I would buy on like 4K,
It's
and
very watchable.
want to watch again. Like, even if I'm like, I have issues with it, I still feel this need to tell people to watch it, or I want to watch it again once it's on 4K, or see it on 70 millimeter. Cause again, I'm pretty sure our screening was not,
Yeah, I think it was
and
digital.
I would have liked to do that.
Makes me also want to go back. Like, I've been, and I might do it this month, is rewatch Everybody Wants Some.
Oh God, what a movie. Yeah. Everyone go watch Everybody Wants Some too, which again, another hangout movie, doesn't necessarily have a plot, but I think is close to being a perfect movie. I love that movie so much. Like
Check your pillows.
it's so good. I might watch that soon too. Okay, let's do it. I actually made time codes. So hello everyone. If you're just skipping right to the best of the year part of the podcast, we're an hour and 43 minutes in, and we're finally getting to our topic of the show. We're gonna go over not super in depth, but Eric and I both posted our, top 15 films of the year in our Barack Obama inspired Comic Sans. Here are our favorite movies of the year in no particular order, but they were in alphabetical order.
I think there is one film that is both our number one movies of the year
Yeah.
or last year.
We should save that.
Yes.
And then we'll talk about, but we are in agreement. Like, so if we want to name one film, the Untitled Movie Podcast's film of the year, we do have that movie because we're in agreement. Where everywhere else we have a lot of similarities in our lists, but they are very different lists. So like we've done in years past, we'll kind of just do you want to do a top 10 and then give?
I think we should just read the list. I think this year, I think it should just be as freewheeling as Licorice Pizza's plot structure.
Let's do that. Sorry, I'm just taking a time code. The best.
You're the best around. No one's ever gonna take you down.
So yeah, let's just do it then. Let's just go over our 25. I know you have a list of your 400 movies you watched this year or whatever in order. You don't need to go through all 400.
No, I'm just going to go through the lists that you made for me, which I appreciate that.
Oh, you're going to do that one. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm going to do,
because I was thinking you were doing the same as well.
I was going to actually count down to number one.
Oh,
like I was going to do it in a ranking order this time.
Oh, interesting. Because I wasn't. I was going to be like,
ooh, okay.
I was just going to name them off on the list, except for the number one movie. And
maybe give some, and then maybe give some honorable mentions that didn't make that 15. Yeah. Okay, let's do that. We can talk about our number one film, and then we'll talk about our lists in general.
Yeah.
So Eric, you kick it off with some honorable mentions, so stuff that didn't make your top 15, but you want to give a shout out to.
Okay,
and
let me get to this.
I'll
21
with you for a second.
Okay, so I'm looking at this now. Yeah, I think that 2021 was a really good year for film, to the point where, I saw almost over 300 films, and I found myself kind of struggling to, cut it down to 15. And so films that didn't make that list, I'm looking on my Letterboxd review right now, or list. No Ordinary Man. You have Q Vadis Ada, The World to Come, and at 13,000 Feet, I think is really great. Gunda, Riders of Justice, which is excellent. The Novice, Shiva Baby, Test Pattern, Tick Tick Boom, Violation, Mafi. Let's see, what else did I skip? Oh, Attica, I think is really excellent. Quite well done. Just going through this now. Beans, and and Malignant. Yeah, those are the films that I really enjoyed quite a bit.
So did you go through your honorable mention?
Oh, yes, and The Lost Daughter is another one that almost made my list.
I didn't hear it, but I'm sure I've seen your list before. So I'll go over my honorable mentions, and we can talk about a few of them if you want. So I put my top 15 or 10. What did I put?
I think it's 15.
Oh, interesting, because I feel like there's a couple of ones here that I didn't shout out. I'll vamp for a sec.
Yeah, there's 15 on your best of list.
Oh, okay. Then I'll go what's not in that top 15. Okay, cool. So in my honorable mentions, I want to shout out Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. I rewatched it again on over the holiday break, and is one of those movies where I think there's movies that I rated higher than it when you're looking at my top 25 films of the year when I do on Letterboxd, which you guys can check out as well. And Eric has a list of every movie he watched last year. Maybe we'll try to copy and paste those into our Untitled list so you guys can check out those if you want. But it was one of those movies where I'm like, I have to give this movie a shout out because like it's one of those movies that I feel like will grow on me more and more, and I feel like I will revisit because it is so absurd and stupid, and I just have a blast watching it. And even that second time was a lot of fun.
And
Other
Jamie
movies,
Dornan too, like, you know,
God,
like that
with that
turnaround
and
for him.
Belfast, like I don't even have Belfast in my top 25, but he's great in both movies, and it really kind of made me a Jamie Dornan fan this year. And I never necessarily doubted the guy. I just, I didn't watch the 50 Shades movies, and that's all I really knew him from. I know that people knew him from other things and he's been good
The
at stuff,
Fall,
but
yeah.
yeah. I want to give a shout out to Ghostbusters Afterlife, Encanto, which I actually liked a lot more the second time I watched it because I was completely lucid this time. The first time we watched it, I was like, man, this feels like a completely different movie. Um, I really connected with the story this time, and the music I actually grew on me. Um, I wasn't maybe as sick of Lin-Manuel Miranda when he brought me back around with another movie you'll see on my top 15, but also Pig, Plan B, which was really early in the year, that I feel like just kind of came and went. I really, really enjoyed Plan B. The Novice, I think, is an excellent movie we saw back at Sundance or South by.
South by.
South by. I think Isabel Furman is fantastic, and that movie really unsettling and interesting and really really cool and underseen. I know it just kind of came out, but I think is excellent. I really liked Nia DaCosta's Candyman. I liked The Kingsman a lot. I know I'm kind of in the minority there. The Lost Daughter, I agree with you. Movie that kind of came out of nowhere for me. Really, really, both performances in that movie and the direction I just thought was excellent. And the Suicide Squad grew on me quite a bit, where I've been itching to rewatch before Peacemaker next week. Where Peacemaker, one of those shows that I really didn't have that much of an interest in, and even Suicide Squad, the first time I watched it, um, I was like, I liked it, but I don't know if I loved it. But then it grew on me, and then all these reviews for Peacemaker, I'm like, all right, I'm in on this show now. I was waiting for reviews, but I was like not expecting people to say some of the things that they were saying. So I'd say those movies are the movies that didn't quite make my list, but I kind of really enjoyed of last year. And even more than that, those are just kind of a handful. And I know, Eric, you started this when I walked away, but I felt like it's a year for movies that kind of went under the radar. And I think there's like a lot of good stuff from last year in 2021 where I had a harder time than usual cutting my list off at 25, and for usually when it comes to the end of the year, it's usually 4 stars and up are the things that are in contention on Letterbox. And sometimes, a movie might be 3.5, but when you're doing your best of list, you want to give it a shout out instead of something else you gave a 4 or whatever. But I found this year there were more movies that I was just like, oh man, this is a good movie that I'm not going to put on my list. And I found myself doing that more often than not this year. And I was like, little underrated year for movies. I think it was really solid all the way around.
Yeah, it's like, again, you know, Nicolas Cage in Peg. You just need to know where to look, you
Oh,
know, for
Pig also. I don't know if I said
you
Pig,
did, you
but
did. Yeah.
okay, I did.
You
Yeah,
just need to
okay.
know where to look for those little
Truffles.
truffles, you know, do the
Truffles
truffle
are good, man.
shuffle.
Are you a truffle man?
They're okay. I think maybe I
They're
find them
strong. They're a
yeah.
little it's an acquired taste
Truffle
for
oil is
sure.
terrible.
I love, dude. When Croatia is a big truffle country, so like when we were there a couple years ago, we were in truffle country, and like I had truffle everything, dude. Like every dish was just filled with truffles and it was delicious. It was so good. Um Okay. Do you want to go back and forth with top 15, or these lists are public? We can just kind of
I
read
think we
through
should just
them and
read
then
them off except for
and
our
then
number one, and then just kind of talk
yep.
afterwards because we'll probably be here a lot longer if we keep going back and
Yeah.
forth.
Cool. I'm gonna just go through my list then, and then you can go through yours. So I'll do every movie except for number one, but I think people knowing Eric and I probably know what our number one is. Uh, Green Knight, Spencer, Malignant, Shiva Baby, Red Rocket. Not my parents' favorite movie. I'll get into that story. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, The Worst Person in the World, Tick Tick Boom, Coda, No Time to Die, The Humans. I'm probably one of the biggest The Humans fans, putting it that high on my
Well,
list.
you donate to the Human
Um,
Fund every year.
yeah, Petite Maman, The Mitchells versus the Machines, and Spider-Man: No Way Home. I think those are 14 of the best movies of the year, or 14 of my favorite movies of the year, however you want to kind of frame this.
It's a good
Eric,
list, and to your point, it was kind of hard, sort of curating this list and putting together 15 because even some of the movies that I didn't even give honorable mentions to, like The Card
yeah,
Counter or Saint
yeah,
Maud, um, had a lot of stuff in them that I did like quite a bit. And so again, it shows you that, like, the rating thing, to give it a 4 or a 5 or even a 3.5 or 3 doesn't necessarily mean that you don't love or dislike a movie. It just means
yeah.
that, it's like it's kind of gauging what you're maybe more interested in. But,
Mhm.
like, again, there was a lot of really good stuff. So I'm just going to read my list right now. So Bergman Island, Drive My Car, Flea, The Green Knight, Licorice Pizza, Memoria, The Mitchells versus the Machines, Petite Mama, Pig, The Power of the Dog, Red Rocket, The Souvenir Part 2, Summer of Soul, and T10.
And great list as well. And like I feel like there's a couple movies on there that didn't quite make my list or even my honorable mentions that we talked about Licorice Pizza, Power of the Dog, a movie that I've seen twice now. Love a lot of the cinematography and performances and stuff, but just didn't quite make my top 25 or something like that. But there's some crossover there that I love. Like I love both of our love for Mitchells versus the Machines. I go back and forth with these top three movies that I have, and I think I'm pretty sold on the number one. I like that that's what we're putting our stamp on as the best film of the year. But my two and three being Spider-Man and Mitchell's versus the Machines. I go back and forth. Like I loved Spider-Man and I was riding off that high, but I think when I look back at things, is like Mitchell's versus the Machines. I think is also a very very special movie and easily the best animated movie of the year. And you guys can listen to our review if you want to hear us rant about it. But
One of the
like
funniest films as well.
yeah, it's and rewatchable. I watched it the night after I first watched it because I had to show it to Nevis, and I was just like, it was unexpected, but I knew like produced by Phil Lord and Chris Miller again. It's kind of a lot of that Spider Verse team at Sony Animation who's doing really really interesting things with their and finally finding I think their style, which I think is really really cool. And Petite Maman. I'm just saying some of our crossover, Eric, and then you can talk about some of the other films that don't show up. But obviously, I think the perfect runtime for a film.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Just no, it's great. I mean, I love long movies too, obviously, but
And
like
there were a
if
lot of long movies
good
last
movies are
year.
good movies, right?
Yeah.
No matter if they're 67 minutes or
Or
300
3 hours long,
minutes.
like Drive
Yeah,
My Car.
yeah. Which is a movie I've been dying to watch. It's just it being 3 hours long. I'm trying to find the like I need to like be in the right headspace for that movie because I want to give it my full attention, and I just haven't got to it yet. So it could have possibly made this list, and it might still.
And you will watch
But
it
at this
before the
time,
Critics' Choice
yes,
deadline.
yeah.
But it's
Which when
it's
did they change that deadline to?
I don't know. I'd have
Because
to
we'd
check
have
it
to see when
again.
the award show is now, right?
Yeah.
Because yeah,
But the thing with Drive My Car, I was in that similar not because I didn't want to see the movie, just because it's 3 hours. So it's just
yeah,
literally starting the film. But once you start watching it,
yeah.
you really don't want it
It's
to
hard.
end.
Yeah, it's hard to stop.
Yeah.
That's good, man. And then I think some of the other crossover, Red Rocket, which we've talked at nauseum about how we both love that, and
Except
I
Anne.
think
Anne doesn't like it.
Simon Rex's performance. My mom. So here's this story. My mom told me not to tell this, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Red Rocket. They watched it, and they had to leave. They were just like, Matt, this is. My mom would have stayed and watched it, she said, but my dad was the one that was like, I can't do this anymore. And I'm bummed I recommended it to them, because I forgot the story of my dad also turning off Florida Project. And I was like, oh, he just doesn't like Sean Baker. And I'm like, my mom was like, oh, I would have finished watching it, but your dad hated it. And but my mom was also like, but I didn't like that he like went back to talk to the very young girl at the donut shop. And I'm like, yeah, you guys probably made the right choice. Like, maybe Sean Baker's just not for you, and or definitely not for my dad, because they didn't make it very far into either movie, and I totally forgot that they turned off Florida Project. So when I recommended Red Rocket, I'm like, I gotta just remember, okay, not everyone, it's not for everyone, especially maybe not your parents. So I recommended Red Rocket for them, and that was a bad decision. But they did like things like Spencer and Coda and No Time to Die. My dad loved The Humans. They were mixed on. My mom really liked it, but my dad was like, it was very artistically shot. I'm like, okay.
Mike's just like, hit too close to home.
No, I mean, they did see a lot of the stuff that I was saying in there, but about my family. My mom died at the Weight Watchers joke and stuff like that. But anyways, that's the Matt Rohrbeck family hour when it comes to best movies of the year. Cause I give them this list, right? And then they kind of go through, and my mom was like, it was one of your favorite movies of the year when it came to Red Rocket. And I was like, yes. But I think they also fall in that category sometimes of like, my dad especially needs to have someone to sort of maybe like cheer for in a movie. Like, he
Right.
doesn't like movies about unlikable protagonists, even if they're compelling. So yeah, Red Rocket didn't work for them. And sorry, Eric, go over some more of the movies you want to shout out.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you already mentioned it, but like Green Knight is another film that was on
Yeah,
both of our
on
lists
both of our
that
lists, yeah.
is one of those movies that, you know, you keep thinking about. David Lowery's one of those guys that, you know, goes into any genre and either reinvents it or, you know, plays within the milieu so perfectly and, you know, makes it his own. And it's such a weird odyssey. And, you know, I wish more fantasy movies were like this, that if, you know, the ones that are getting made within the studio system are kind of following, you know, like you know, whether they be franchising them or what have you. But like, this is like, again, visually speaking, and it was also our first film back in the theater last year, so it kind of has that kind of sentimentality and nostalgia weirdly as well. But it's just so well done. And again, just thinking about certain moments of, you know, Dev Patel just oozing movie star
Mm-hmm.
charisma on the screen, and um you know, the practical makeup and you know, aesthetics that are used throughout. It's just it's one of those films where, again, it's not going to be for everybody because it's
Yeah, I
super
told them not to
slow.
watch it. I was like, don't watch this one.
No, but it's a great Christmas movie, and so maybe it'll be a
I've been
yearly.
itching to rewatch it. Have you rewatched it since
No,
we
but I
saw it?
have the 4K
No.
because I bought it in LA when we
Oh,
were
right,
yeah, when we
right,
were
right.
traveling.
I got a couple 4Ks recently.
Yeah, there's a couple things that, like the slower movies, I like. Memory is another one that I do want to
I did
rewatch,
really enjoy, but didn't make my list
but
either.
I'm also afraid to rewatch it because I think the power of that movie
Is
is
that first
watching it in
watch? Yeah,
theaters, because I think
yeah.
with the Pitchapong Veerasithakul films, there is
That's a
some,
hard watch at home.
yeah, even though, like, again, it's deliberate and it's
Yeah,
by
totally.
design, but I think like when you're sitting in a theater, you're completely immersed in the sound design of the film and the narrative, and it being a very loose narrative and just kind of almost dreamlike hanging out kind of movie. It works really well, and it's also weirdly his most accessible film because he has, you know, Tilda Swinton in the lead. And again,
Accessible is a strong word.
for him when you look at his
I
other
know.
movies,
Yeah,
I
it's
totally agree with what you're saying. Like, it's still pretty much esoteric, but for him it's like his, you know, like his
Spider-Man No Way Home.
exactly, you know, like it's his big blockbuster. Bergman Island, I think, is one of
It's great
the best
too.
written films
Again,
of the year.
yeah.
I think it plays with sort of our understanding of, you know, art in an interesting way, of how we value somebody, you know, for their work and their vision, to the point of, again, franchising them, but also poking fun at elitist fandom, as much as, you know, elitist poke fun at sort of pop culture fandom in general. So I think that there's something really interesting there. I think the performances are really
Great
excellent.
movie, yeah.
I really loved Flea, which was a
Another
wonderful
great
movie that
movie,
kind
yeah.
of began the year at Sundance. Um, the Mitchells versus the Machines is amazing. My favorite performance of the year is Nicolas Cage in Pig, who is both tender and vulnerable, and proves that he still has it. And I keep thinking about that restaurant scene specifically.
God, it's so good.
He's amazing in that movie, and I think that that film and First Reform will make a great double bill one day, of sort of being
Yeah,
these weird sort of like meta movies that are about both the industry and, in the case of Pig, because First Reform, like looking at like the churches, like the smaller indie church going against the big conglomerate
sure.
church, is
Yeah,
almost like
yeah,
blockbuster cinema versus, you know,
yeah.
the art house, and how the art house is dying, and, you know, what's left are these kind of like bigger multiplexes. Then with Pig, you have a guy who, you know, started his career very strong and kind of created this image of himself and this folklore, and became something almost like a joke, and then left the mainstream industry to go and do VOD films, in the way that Nicolas Cage's Cook character comes back into
Yeah.
civilized society to see what the world is like, and, you know, him trying to grapple with grief and loss, and actually have that confrontation, and because he's been putting it off for so long. So and The Souvenir Part 2, another movie that kind of plays with the meta aspects of the first film, and is so wonderfully put together by Joanna Hogg, and sort of telling a semi-autobiographical narrative, but also kind of playing within the context of being a first time filmmaker or being a film student. I think is a lot of fun. And it sticks the landing perfectly. Summer of Soul, Questlove's documentary, shines a light on this, you know, series of concerts in the summer of 1969 that did not get the spotlight because, you know, one, it was predominantly an African American and Latin based concert, and also because of Woodstock happening around the same time, it eclipsed it. But to see that footage again for the first time in 50 years, and the way that it's put together is so moving and fun. And just seeing like Stevie Wonder play the drums in the opening sort of so yeah, there was a lot of really great movies there. Like there was so many films worth checking out, whether they be VOD releases, or you know, returning to the theater this last year, and then, you know, leaving the theater again. So it was a very melancholy experience overall. And even just like doing TIFF this year again, and going to press screenings in late August, but then also seeing some stuff at the beginning was you know, interesting, but also kind of nice to have some normalcy going back. And you know, as much as you are hopeful that things will get better, you know, you have to understand that there's probably going to be a lot of stopping and starting when it comes to
Yeah.
you know, getting back to something that resembles what life was like before COVID.
Yeah, that's why it was an interesting year overall, right? Like, um, I made a list of movies that I would have loved to have seen in theaters, right? Like, I'd love to do a program at Lightbox or something called Not in Theaters or something after this is all over, and just program a series of movies that never got a chance, or maybe had a very limited theatrical run because of everything that was happening, where even some of the the stuff like Barb and Star I never got to see in a theater with a crowd. Like Candyman never got to see in a theater. The Novice never got to see in a theater.
Malignant.
Malignant I would have loved. Like I'm so bummed I didn't go to that Midnight Madness screening that Peter set up after TIFF, or on that last weekend of TIFF, where it was like an unofficial Midnight Madness screening where he introed it and had that crowd, because like that would have been the perfect Midnight Madness movie. That would have been a blast. Like I mean I had a blast watching it with you, but even Shiva Baby or Worst Person in the World or Tick Tick Boom, and I would have liked to go see, and I did have a chance with Tick Tick Boom and stuff like that, so that's my own fault, and it did play at Lightbox. But Coda, another one that I watched on at Sundance.
Yep.
So The Humans, like again, these are movies that Petit Maman, Mitchell's versus the Machines, I would have loved to see on a big screen, right? And like those are, it's so interesting, so many of these movies. And look at our number one movie of the year, which we will get to. It's the official Untitled movie of the year we're going to get to.
It's the
and you might
consensus
go, what
title
is
of
it? Our list. Everything else a little rearranged. And every movie you mentioned, Eric, were like on the cusp of being like, it was exactly what I was talking about. Like basically everything you had on your list that didn't show up in mine were like those movies that I wish I mean, I could easily do a top 50 of the year or a top 40, and a lot of those movies would be on there. Like the ones that I really liked, but there was something, I just liked this group of movies more. But yeah, there's so many of these movies that I didn't even get to see in a theater.
Well, even
Which I
going
think
back
is,
to not last year now, but almost 2 years ago, like something like Nomadland, I would have
yeah.
loved to have seen it in a theater.
And sort of had a chance because it did play at Lightbox Limited, but we were in this weird time, right, where you didn't either, if you'd seen something, you didn't want to go out of your way to go to the theater to go see it again, right? Even Black Widow, which isn't on my list at all or anything, like I liked it as a mid-tier MCU movie, but I didn't see Black Widow in theaters, which is wild. Like the first MCU movie, I think the only one I haven't seen in theaters. Like literally the only MCU movie I didn't see in theaters. I'm trying to think if there was another one, but I don't think there is.
No, I
Um
mean Morbius
and
just got moved,
yeah.
even though it's not MCU.
Yeah, I know. And I think if it, plays Cinesphere down the line in an IMAX thing or something like that, I will end up going. And I had plenty of chances to go do it because when theaters came back, Black Widow did play theatrically for a little while, but um a weird year. But yeah, like if you look at Spider-Man theaters, Mitchell's not, Petite Maman not, Humans not, Bond yes, Coda no, Tick Tick Boom no, Worst Person in the World no, Shang-Chi yes, Red Rocket yes, Shiva Baby no, Malignant no, Spencer yes,
Yes.
we did see that in theaters, Green Knight yes, Pig
No.
no. Did we see that in theaters? No.
No, it was a link.
Yeah. Lost Daughter, no. Encanto, yes. Ghostbusters, yes. Plan B, no. Kingsman, no. Candyman, no. Novice, no. Suicide Squad, yes. Barb and Star, no. So it's like pretty split, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting. So yeah, interesting year, but a good one. I think any movie I would suggest for the, there are those weird outliers where not for everyone, but I think the majority of these movies I would highly recommend, and I'm sure you guys listening have seen the majority of them. Some of them you haven't had a chance, like Worst Person in the World or Petite Maman, which are these weird ones that I internally struggle with, of being like, should I put them on my 2021 list or 2022? But ultimately they're eligible for awards this year. We saw them this year. I'm like, okay, I'm considering it sometimes based on where the movie, its home country, if it was released in that country, I kind of go by that rule, but it kind of changes. So that's why things like Petite Maman and Worst Person in the World are on these lists and things like that. So let's get to it, Eric. We have a consensus number one choice for the Untitled movie of the year. And it is, it might to some people be like, you bastards, that's not a movie.
That's a cop out.
But It's like when people put Twin Peaks: The Return as their number one film of the year. Our number one film of 2021 is Bo Burnham's Inside, and I think we're in complete agreement of that.
Yes, he turned 30. He fought Jeffrey Bezos. He talked about mental illness. He did it all in his little home, or like a second home behind, or beach house
It's
behind
like
his home.
Pool House or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Um,
Um,
it's a movie that it's a movie. It's a special. It's a stream of consciousness. It's
performance art.
yeah, it's all these weird things put together, but it perfectly encapsulates the last 2 years of how everybody has been living, and summing it up in a way that's universal but also specific to him, but also weirdly calling himself out because of the luxuries that he has, making a Netflix special while, still being able to work, and also, being entitled, being both successful and a cis white male. It's a funny musical. It's so well written, in terms of the music numbers.
Incredible cinematography and lighting.
Yeah, and again, like, just going back to, like, if somebody were like, I'm thinking, like, okay, so my nephew Ivor is 3 months now, and when he is of an age where, he'll learn about this part of history
Say
in
10 to 13 years from now or
yeah, and
whatever.
he'll want to know, like, oh, well, what was life like living in during COVID? I'll be like, well, you know what? There's a lot of really powerful documentaries. There was one that was released through Neon and National Geographic called the First Wave, but a movie that I think also kind of like tapped into a lot of what people were feeling personally and emotionally is that, and that would be the film I would recommend to him, or to anybody that, future generations want to know, like,
So
how
Bo
people
Burnham's Inside?
yeah, how
Yeah.
people were
Yeah.
feeling during this period, and being open to having that conversation about mental health awareness, and just what people are going through and struggling with, and just being cooped up inside.
Yeah. Perfect. You nailed it. I don't really have much more to say other than like uh
Jeffrey Jeffrey
I've
Bezos.
I've listened to that album basically on repeat for the last year, and I remember just eagerly anticipating it because like I've been a Bo Burnham fan for a very long time, since his early YouTube days. I saw him perform live at, I think it was Second City here in Toronto when he was still like a teenager. And um, I've just completely loved everything he's done from, eighth grade a few years ago to his numerous albums he's put out, his YouTube content, which is,
His
he
performance in
looks back
Promising
on.
Young Woman.
Yes. And I remember not really no one really knew anything about Inside. He just randomly said, like, I have a new special dropping on Netflix like in a couple weeks. And I remember everyone going, holy shit, new comedy from Bo Burnham, because we hadn't got that. He kind of transitioned into acting and directing, and even that was pretty scarce. And um yeah, putting this on, and I remember just sitting down with Nevis and we were talking about it the other day of being like, we came home from something, we were out for a while, and it was like one of those things where I think we were just a trip for the two of us, obviously, because you couldn't really do much during that time. We were exhausted, but we're like, oh, the Bo Burnham special's out, let's watch this. And just being completely captivated and just like laughing so hard throughout the whole thing, but then also being like mesmerized with like, it's just, he's one of those guys that you're just like, fuck, I wish I was as talented as this person. And like to be like, to come up with the music and shoot it all himself and edit it and just go through that, which is both intentional and unintentional, of like someone who's obsessive over something and cares so deeply, but also wants to reflect on his previous work, and why, when it gets very personal, and talking about why he stopped performing stand up, and like you said, tackling mental health, and just tackling, if you listen to a lot of the lyrics, which are very fun and playful at times, but he's talking about uh, really, really interesting things about the world, and someone who's taking this moment of time and really reflecting on it and how we are as a human race, I think is really, really interesting. And I've just listened to that album on repeat, and I've almost been scared to go back and rewatch the special, because like it was so, or the film, because it was such a special experience that first time that I watched it. And I've been wanting to go back, and I've listened to the album over and over and over again. But it was something just stuck with me and was my favorite thing of the year, for the entire year, and nothing really ever even came close to it. I thought it was as close to perfect as you could get from a movie and a special, or whatever you want to call it. I really do think though, like, it felt theatrical and felt like a, again, like you said, a perfect picture of what we were going through and what everyone was going through collectively, and just this one person who puts himself through it to showcase that. I thought was like, I've been off for a year from a full-time job and been inside most of the time, and I'm like, I wish, again, there's just people who, got it, and he's just one of those guys where I'm like, fuck man, I wish I had like 2% of the talent that you have, because like, from every element of it, it just feels like almost immaculate, and I just think it's so good. It's so good.
Well, it's also just interesting to think about, like, one of the songs is 30, and it's about him turning
Yep.
30 and putting those pressures on himself. And I think there were a lot of movies this year that kind of looked at that and sort of the pressures that we put on ourselves. I think the flip side of the coin for this movie, in a way, and is on your best of list, and was in my honorable mentions, is Tick Tick Boom, where Jonathan Larson,
Yeah.
part of that plot is him, hitting this sort of milestone age wise and thinking like, well, what do I have to show for it? And then comparing yourself to somebody else, like, the late great Stephen Sondheim, who,
Yeah.
did all these amazing things before hitting 30. Or then again, the worst person in the world, where, that character turns 30 and still feels that she doesn't have her, life together, and, it feels guilty by choices she makes. And we talked about Licorice Pizza. It's interesting that we're getting movies from filmmakers who are probably, a lot of which are in
Around
their
the
in
same age.
or in their late 30s, early 40s, looking back at their time in their
Sure.
30s and thinking like, okay, well, what was expected of me then? Am I supposed to be in this place now? Am I putting too much pressure on myself and being too introspective, and bringing this anxiety to a place where it doesn't need to be? But also, again, being a perfectionist like Bo Burnham is. There's just so much that's very relatable in that. And again, like,
In all of that. And
you're also, to your point, frustrated with how talented he is, and how, like,
yeah.
again, it's like Jonathan Larson in Tick
Yeah.
Tick Boom, where he can take like any, mundane sort of observation or thing and turn it into a jingle, or turn it into a song. And sort of like, what's the cost of being somebody who is a genius but also still a human being, and how they affect the people in their own lives, and things like that. Because Bo Burnham, again, very talented guy, and having interviewed him for eighth grade, he's very self-deprecating, and
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah.
he
Sometimes
he's
the smartest people are, though.
yeah, and super tall. That's the other thing about him, that is just like, he really is like a giant when you meet him in person. But when you think about how these characters are struggling within a world that is either period based or modern, still somewhat modern, because obviously Tick Tick Boom takes place in the early 90s. But you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, at least you're not the only one. Like, there are other people that are, in your shoes, and the people that are suffering just like you in one way or another are people that are also very talented, and
Yeah.
people that you think have their shit together, or that are, have stability in their lives, whether it be financially, or the support of family and friends. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to have their problems. And I
Yeah.
think that that's very weirdly reassuring, that someone like Bo Burnham is able to be so open and and candid in sharing
and
those.
put that into his art. Yeah,
Yeah, and
which
again, the
is really
songs are
cool.
just catchy, like White Women's
They're
Instagram.
catchy, but also saying something. But some things like White Women's Instagram isn't really saying much and is kind of a
But it's
very
not just mocking as
um,
well. Like there is
but
something that's
there
kind
is
of
a moment in
sweet.
there that is very sweet, right? And I think that's why each song has that, or each performance in the film has that element that isn't just one note where you think it's going, like it'll go a completely different direction, or even from the visual standpoint, like for a guy who had this small pool house, how he was able to use that space in different ways or come up with different bits or uh, songs, and how that was going to be portrayed in this film, I thought was like, again, yeah, you're very jealous, and you're just like, you bastard, you're so smart and talented that it's almost frustrating, but like in a good way. And even something like The Humans, like I like that one, talking about that theme that we've seen through a lot of this, and I think that's why a lot of movies that you love, you see yourself in it, or you can connect with it on an emotional level, or from a metaphorical level, or anything, where like even Steven Yeun's character in The Humans, I really love that conversation where they ask him about him and him being in his mid 30s and saying like, I don't know what I want to do, I'm going back to school, and things like that. Like you can see a pattern in a lot of the shit that I enjoy, I think, where you see yourself or you can relate to a lot of the stuff. And that's the same thing goes to Tick Tick Boom, or when I see a lot of my family in something, or and even you don't even necessarily have to see yourself one to one, like it just can be thematically, like with a character and stuff like that. Or you get things like Malignant where you're just like, I don't see myself in this at all, but this is amazing.
You go,
uh,
Gabriel.
but yeah, Inside is phenomenal. And
Well, that's where Gabriel's from, Inside.
yeah, I love it. Good year for movies, I think. So,
Yeah.
um, I can't wait to watch Inside again. I can't wait to watch a lot of these movies again. And I'm a sucker for rewatching stuff. I need to get moving. I'm both a sucker for rewatching stuff and a glutton for new release films. So, January is always that weird time. So it's fun to reflect and maybe revisit a few of these movies that you really liked, or show them to other people who haven't watched them yet, if you can safely.
Or
And
catch
then,
up on stuff that you have missed. Like
yeah,
it
exactly.
like
Like
January into February is a really good time, especially for a lot of the international films where like you can
that's what I'm gonna
watch something
put
like
my
Drive My
focus on.
Car
Yeah.
or like T10 or things like that, where those movies maybe they didn't play in your area, or they didn't, they were only sort of major cities, and now they're
Mhm.
available on VOD, and you can watch them from the comfort of your home and feel safe in doing so. Or if theaters are open and you do feel safe to go, you can go. But it's interesting to think, like, we're film critics, and we have a certain amount of opportunity and access when it comes to a lot of these films, that when we watch them and we come to the end of the year and we talk about these movies, a lot of these films haven't been seen yet by the public. Even the films that have been released, like a lot of the movies that get limited releases, like I think of like the year that Little Children was released, which was 2006, the Todd Field film, that never came out to Durham. I remember it was the first time I went to Toronto to see a movie, like, because like I just literally, it didn't come to AMC. Now it's Landmark, but like,
Yeah, I remember doing that for a few things back in the day too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so you have to take into mind that something like Drive My Car, with the exception of the Lightbox, isn't necessarily going to play everywhere. And even something like Red Rocket, Sean Baker is very adamant about the theatrical experience. So a lot of these movies people will still be catching up with even into February and March.
Yep. Which is, I think, why it's important to kind of share this stuff and say, you know, where people can get these things. And I totally agree with everything you're saying. And that's why, like, I love my parents going through these lists, or Nevis watching some stuff with her that she missed out on because we went to screenings or something like that. Like, I get joy just sharing this stuff with people, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't for people, right? And like whenever you show someone one of your favorite movies of the year and they're like, I didn't like that, or I'll see like obviously like it's all subjective and everyone like what you like and don't like, but it's always kind of like when you suggest something to someone and then you see them after either rated on Letterboxd or they talk to you and they're like, it didn't really work for me. You're like, fuck. Like you want to hit it out of the park when you're like recommending stuff to people. And again, what's going to be on my list is going to be different on Eric's list. Kevin McGuire and Rihanna, who are on the show, that follow them on Instagram. They're great. Follows. Kevin posts every one of his Letterboxd reviews in his story, which I'm trying to kind of do this year too. Just for, again, some people might also be like, man, no one gives a shit, which I'm also like, fair.
If you like
But
doing it, who cares?
exactly. And then if one person goes, oh shit, Matt gave that a 4.5, I'm gonna go watch that, and I'm like, all right,
You
it's
gave
not
the
necessarily my,
Benchwarmers 5 out of 5?
not necessarily, I guess it is kind of my job, but anyways, I'm rambling now.
We're not gonna, we don't do worst of lists, but I will say the one thing I did notice quite a bit, and we've talked about it on the show, is there were more disappointments than I was expecting last year. You know, movies like False Positive and Benedetta and Dune, and on my end, something like Ghostbusters Afterlife. So like
Mhm.
it was just interesting that like to kind of equate that, you know, even if you love a filmmaker or you know somebody that's within the industry, a writer, an actor, they're not always going to hit it out of the park, and it makes you love the work that you do love from them even more, and it does also still make you excited to watch what's next, because as much as I love someone like Denis Villeneuve, I really feel that Dune is not a self-contained story, and that it really can't be judged until we've seen Dune Part 2 and watched that whole as you know, as a whole. It's not a complete work, just part 1. And then with Benedetta, as much as, you know, we both love Paul Verhoeven, and specifically, you know, his time when he kind of came to America and made movies like RoboCop and Flesh and Blood and Starship Troopers and things like that, there was just something that was like a little bit disappointing with sort of the satire of it all. Another movie that I didn't like, that you liked a little bit more than me, was Adam McKay's Don't Look Up. So I think
Mhm.
there was a lot of films that like I wouldn't, you know, I'm not gonna say like, oh, you know, like the obvious thing like Cosmic Sin is the worst movie of the year, which it is. It's terrible,
Yeah,
but
worst of list, but like I think it's fair to talk about movies that did disappoint you. I mean,
yeah,
we kind of went over a lot of that with our reflecting on, and I think that's where those disappointments come from. Is like when we put together a list
our
like
most anticipated.
most anticipated. It's like when one of those movies, uh, and a lot of those movies didn't hit for us, or like a good amount of them didn't. That's when it becomes, but then there's the other way around where there's movies that are complete surprises, right? That you had weren't even on your radar, like something like Coda, which I didn't talk enough about. Like, wasn't really on my radar at all. And I think most people
Or
until
Malignant.
Malignant, another one where like I like James Wan. Everyone knows my love for the Saw movies and things like that. But it looked Conjuring adjacent to the point where I'm like, I don't know if I need this. And I had no idea what I was getting into with that movie. And I had a blast watching that with Eric, where I wouldn't have said I was that excited for it. I think even when you came over to watch it, we were both like, all right, let's watch this on HBO Max or
Double
whatever.
bill of Cry
And
Macho and Malignant.
but we did hear from people that like, no, it's pretty fun. And I'm like, I had no idea what to expect. And that was such a pleasant surprise. So I think it goes the other way too, right? Not to try to end this on a negative note, trying to take it positively. But like, I will agree with you that I don't love those really clickbaity worst of the year lists. Like, I feel like they're very lazy and just kind of, I can see someone at a magazine or a website, their boss's boss being like, "No, you got to write one of these because it gets clicks, right? Negativity gets clicks on the
I
internet."
mean, that's what
And
social
like,
media is
and yeah,
basically.
so all you need to do is worst movies of the year list and put one movie on there that people really genuinely liked and you didn't, and you're going to get a ton of clicks on that because they're going to be like, wow, you included come on your, or whatever. Like, even a movie that's not great but like most people enjoyed, throw it on there, or Ghostbusters or something
To be
like
a
that.
contrarian to
Like,
a certain degree
yeah,
as well,
and
right?
even that, like, and I'm not saying you're being a contrarian with Ghostbusters, but that would be a good movie to put on like a worst of the year list, even though it's not one of the worst movies of the year. It was a big disappointment to you, but I think, like you said, Cosmic Sin, like there are objectively bad
Oh
movies
yeah.
that you can say are the worst movies of the year. But even then, that
You don't
feels
have to
kind of
dwell on them
stupid.
either.
Yeah, like I think it's fine in a conversation to bring up stuff like Nightmare Alley, another one of those that I felt like was a pretty big disappointment. Many Saints of Newark wasn't necessarily a disappointment for me, but I think because I'd never watched The Sopranos,
House
maybe
of
after
Gucci
Seinfeld.
was not good.
Yeah, things like that. Don't Breathe 2, I would put in that category of um, a huge disappointment
Well,
because
thinking with the first
I
one being
yeah,
again to
a
your point,
pleasant surprise.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I wouldn't put Space Jam. Maybe I would put Space Jam: A New Legacy in there because, um, the nostalgia I felt for the first Space Jam movie. I'm like, okay, let's see what they'll do with this, and
Eternals, I
it's
would say, was
awful.
pretty disappointing.
Yeah, for a huge MCU guy like me,
And
like
Chloe Zhao.
and Chloe Zhao, like I think that would be a big one. And then on the pleasant surprise side of things, I named Coda and you named Malignant.
Well, the Suicide Squad as
Um,
well. I mean,
yeah,
like that is a rebound if there ever was one.
um, just from that first movie, not
Yeah.
necessarily James Gunn,
No,
but
no, no,
like,
no.
yeah, yeah,
Just from like, they Warner Brothers finally made the movie that they wanted to, which was, Guardians, the R-rated Guardians of the Galaxy film with the guy who made Guardians of the Galaxy, and it worked. And I think that third act is actually kind of amazing. And it's
Mhm.
really just a solid film. Like I think it's one of those movies that, because of the, people going back to the theaters in the summer, but also it kind of getting that day and date release in the US maybe didn't help it, but it is one that the more I think about it, the more I like it. And again, the visual effects, I think Starro is incredible. Like
Yeah,
that
I do
design.
want to rewatch it. I'm gonna rewatch it this week, I think, before Peacemaker. And then on the disappointments again, Halloween Kills, I think, is a huge one because I loved Halloween 2018 so much. And that goes into the whole legacy sequel thing that we were talking about earlier too, right? I'm trying to find if there's another one
I'm
that I
just
want to
looking on
say
my
or
list now. On my list.
pleasant
Oh, the Tomorrow
surprise.
War. I think
Yeah,
the Tomorrow War, it
we're
was
two people that really liked the Tomorrow War, where it didn't quite make either of our lists or honorable mentions, but like um there's one that was absolutely a pleasant surprise where I was not expecting to enjoy that movie as much as I did.
yeah.
Like again, not something that's I've forgotten about as the year has gone by, but like um I still think is a really, really enjoyable movie and showed me that Chris Pratt can still be a movie star. Super Mario Bros. 2022. Let's go,
You're gonna
baby.
die on that hill. Another one that I was really disappointed with was Annette. I think that was one that I was really
Right,
excited about, and I
right.
think the music just didn't work for me at all, and it was kind of disappointing. The Guilty, I didn't really love. The Matrix Resurrections, I was disappointed by. Antlers wasn't
I
great.
watched it this year, but Love and Monsters, it's a last year movie, but I watched it in April of this year. So
Pleasant surprise, yeah.
huge pleasant surprise there. And I know you gave a shout out to it the other day as
Yeah, I was just
well.
thinking about like,
Um,
when it comes to the awards season, and I was talking to talking to Nathaniel Rogers of the Film Experience, who was on Cinema Scene recently, about like
good plug, good plug.
the homogenization of award season, where everybody kind of picks the same like 10 films
Yeah.
that are kind of declared the movies that are worthy of nominations, instead of like, critics groups and bigger awards bodies maybe picking the things that they absolutely love by following their heart, instead of, being strategic and sort of aligning with what the Academy will probably eventually pick.
Yeah.
And we were talking about certain films that it's like something like that. I think is really interesting that got a visual effects nomination, and it was this small little movie that didn't really even get much of a push by Paramount in any way whatsoever, and still was able to get a nomination. And the effects work in that film is incredible, for what it is. And so like those kind of things are always the ones that are most exciting, um in terms of like the anomalies of like, oh, like this group actually kind of went sort of left instead of going right with everybody else. And usually the screenplay categories are pretty good for being sort of imaginative, but then, like, I mean, we didn't cover the Golden Globes obviously, but it was funny, like, seeing like
Yeah, we didn't
their
mention them at all, and that was intentional.
yes, but we're going to make fun of them in this little last little bit here, but like their social media
Oh
sort of
my god.
categorization of
For
West Side
someone who
Story.
just in general, dude, like they deleted some of it and re-uploaded some, but like that was the most egregious one, or the funniest one, where it's like laughter is the cure. West Side
I
Story,
mean, to be
like,
fair, we did laugh
was
at
like,
Ansel Elgort's reaction
yeah,
in the
we
third
wanted
act.
to find that screen cap and post it, but what a yeah, I mean, as someone who used to work in social media marketing, like I can just see that whole thing. They hired an agency because they weren't doing an award show this year, and the agency was like, we'll write clever copy. And then I know the feedback was like, well, you have to include the entire um award name in the tweet, because even that looked obnoxious and stupid, where it's like they had to have the entirety of the award name, so they couldn't even say what movie people were from, because there's a 240 character limit on Twitter, because they had to have a quip at the beginning, because they're like, oh, we want you to have like a funny pun or a fun line. And I can just it's giving me like flashbacks to like
Marketing
anxiety.
anxiety.
Yeah, anxiety flashbacks of being in this meeting and getting the feedback from the HFPA, and like and just the way that I drafted a tweet that I didn't end up tweeting, just being like, okay, everyone was like, we need to do something different, award shows aren't working. I don't think a tweet thread is the way to go. Like, I just don't think it works, because I mean, there's probably better ways to do it, but you should have just sent me a PDF press release and an email, and everyone could have talked about it on their own.
If they wanted to.
Yeah, if they wanted to, which I don't even think it's worth uh, giving them the time of day. And this might have killed them for sure this year. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, they'll try again next year, but um, it just kind of came and went, and I think people were just mostly dunking on them on Twitter.
And rightfully so. Again,
Yeah,
like, just the way that those tweets were structured, and just
they were
thinking,
hard to read,
yeah.
and they were just sometimes didn't make any sense. Like literally didn't make any sense.
Well, the West Side Story thing
It's
just is
dude, I also, because they would have had to draft the tweets before they knew the winners,
right.
right? So whoever they hired for this thing, probably not even a movie person, and they're just a marketing person, right? And then they go, "Oh, it's best comedy movie or musical." So I'm just going to draft comedy copy, and we're just going to drop in the name of the winner when we're told who won, right? And they don't double check it or anything, which is wild. And it got out there, where they would have just, I don't know how it got approved, or maybe there was two versions, because I saw the other one they just changed, like, music is the best medicine or something they changed it to. And it's just generic shit like that, where they might have had two versions of it. They're like, well, if a comedy wins, use this one. If a musical wins, use this one. And they just used the wrong one. But in general, it was just convoluted by the wording of everything, where it was like, they had to put so much into one tweet, where the 240 characters, if you use that much copy, you're not really going to get as much engagement. And then the way that they structured it, of having to have the entirety of the award name in there, was just, it was like, you blink and be like, what are they saying? And the way that it was structured, you're like, who won? Like, when someone's name is buried in the middle of this, or a movie is, and it's just, it was ridiculous
West
last
Side
night.
Story is
But
a comedy now. Like, it almost
I
feels
didn't
like
even follow it. So Power of the Dog, we're going long. We're gonna wrap up in a second anyway. But like, Power of the Dog won best drama, and then West Side Story won best comedy musical.
yeah.
Hilarious.
Well, it's also funny to think, like,
I don't know any of the acting awards who won. Sorry.
no, I
Keep
don't
going.
either. I was just thinking though, like, in terms of Globe coverage, or even red carpet coverage in general, has never been great. And I tweeted you that that still, but like there was that one year that E covered or was sort of the main sort of coverage for the Golden Globes red carpet, and they had all these like fun facts that would come up. And one of the fun facts was Michael J. Fox was
Was
diagnosed
diagnosed with
with
Parkinson.
Parkinson's in 1991, and I'm like, who
Yeah.
proved that? It's like, who saw that and was like,
It's
let's go.
mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling sometimes. Like, I to use the term "fun fact" and then share that is obscene, and you saw a bit of that in the tweets last night.
Like, I
And,
feel like they hired the same person who did the fun facts for E for the Golden
and
Globe
again,
tweets.
I love award season. I love the end of the year and celebrating the best movies of the year. We just did a whole hour on it here, right? And I I love the Oscars every year, as silly as they are and how overlong and kind of boring the award show is. Like, I'm still into it every year, and I like to kind of go, "Ooh, what's going to get nominated? Who's going to win?" Like, it's fun to be part of that, right? Like, even if it's kind of silly and it doesn't really matter, but um, yeah, it's even weirder the last couple years because of COVID and everything, right? So I'll be curious to see how they do the Oscars this year. And when is it supposed to be? Like, I know Critics' Choice got punted. I was supposed to be there yesterday, and I was supposed to be in LA right now. But
I think it's I
Critics'
think the
Choice got punted
nominations
to end
are
of February, early March, and
yeah.
then Oscars are still beginning of March. Let me
I
find
think
out.
so. Matt looked that up, but I think the nominations are sometime at the end of January. SAG nominations
Oh, it's
are this
later this year. It's
Wednesday.
March 27th
Oh
for
God,
for
we're gonna be
the
I mean, we were
Oscars,
sick of it last year.
because it was very late last
Yeah,
year, right?
but this is also
Oh,
like SAG. So as we're recording this, the SAG nominations will be announced on
tomorrow morning.
Wednesday.
Oh, Wednesday. So this will
Yes,
be out a day before
yeah,
SAG nominations.
but
Before
those will
it's
be telling for the
at least acting
yeah,
nominees. Yeah. That's interesting, man. Yeah, I like award season.
Gabriel for Best Actor.
I don't disagree. Anyways, thank you all for listening. Another jam-packed episode of the Untitled Movie Podcast. Looks like we're back on that almost 3 hours every week, which we should maybe tone down. But we had the couple big end of year podcasts with the most anticipated, which you guys can check out. Last episode 109. If you've sat through this long, if you want another 3-hour podcast. We also have some reviews up right now for Spider-Man No Way Home, both a spoiler cast and a spoiler-free version. We got news today that No Way Home will be on digital at the end of February 25th, I believe, and then we'll get a 4K release probably early March for Spider-Man No Way Home. So check out those reviews. We mentioned we have a spoiler-free review for Cobra Kai 4, The Kingsman, Licorice Pizza. We talked about it a lot, and Red Rocket on this show, but you can check out our individual reviews for those, as well as Nightmare Alley, Don't Look Up. A lot of the movies that are on our lists, we reviewed all of those. There's a few outliers that we didn't get to based on the Christmas vacation and shutdown and all that kind of stuff, and we might revisit them, but I think we talked enough about a lot of those movies on this episode. We'll have reviews up for some of the things Eric mentioned. Like, we're going to get a little bit more creative over the next couple weeks over on Untitled Movie Reviews. We'll have bear with us. We're still figuring out what reviews are going to come out when, but like Eric mentioned, we should have a Tragedy of Macbeth review out for you this week for its Apple TV Plus release. We will also do a Yellow Jackets season 1 review after the final episode next Sunday. We'll also do a Book of Boba Fett review, whether that's after we talked a lot about it on today's episode. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll hold it and just review the whole season when it's done. And we'll just maybe talk about it casually on this show as we're watching. And then the other things, like, we haven't talked Matrix Resurrections much. Like, I think we were holding that, but then it kind of came and went. And it was a weird time because it was over the holidays, and then with the theater shut down and things like that. So we might get around to Matrix. I still think we could have an interesting conversation about that,
Well, we
but
could, because it is getting
a
a
VOD.
premium VOD release in Canada, and I believe it's the January 24th.
Yes, in a couple weeks, I think. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll hold it for that here in Canada, because like everything's shut down now. So a lot of people don't. I know a lot of people in the US have watched it on HBO Max and things like that. And there's a great Kind of Funny in review with those guys. Paris Lilly joined them on that, and he's a huge Matrix fan. So it was interesting getting his perspective and going, okay, cool. We're not insane like this. They all did not like the movie either.
Right.
And Paris is like huge Matrix fan. So,
And then going back, as mentioned at the beginning of the show, if you go into our archives, we have reviews for movies that are getting VOD releases, like See For Me and Italian Studies. So if you want to know what we thought of those films, you can go back and listen to our thoughts when we saw them at the film festivals that we were streaming last year.
One-stop shop for everything. Head over to our letterbox, which is Untitled_movies. We're always updating it with new reviews, new ratings, new podcasts, video versions, which you can get on YouTube, or the audio versions are all up there. So one-stop shop is Untitled_movies on Letterboxd. Thank you all for this massive podcast, for listening or watching. We really, really do appreciate it. And as always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews at EM6211. It's bad.
You can find some of them over on Twitter at EM6211.
It is true. It's true. At rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211. It's the first episode back, guys.
And there's not much to cover. We still haven't talked news. Well, you know, I can't.
I did a little bit. We talked about Turning Red and it going to.
Yeah.
You know,
and I want to see Scream. It's
going to be so hard to avoid spoilers.
I know, and like, God. I know, and I really want to see it. It's getting good reviews. I just rewatched the first 4, and like, I'm just like, man, I liked Ready or Not a lot, and I'm like, I'm so bummed that like we're not going to be able to see it, but we will have a review soon. Until next time,
you're simply the best, better than all the rest.